Hey everyone. Welcome back to DC Harry. Get ready for an amazing tale. What if Aquaman found Harry at age 6, on private drive and Atlantean magic made him king of 7 seas and wizarding world? Smash that like button and subscribe for more. Here we go. Chapter 1. The Boy the Sea Chose. The rain had been falling on Privet Drive for 3 hours before Arthur Curry noticed the child. He'd been walking the street with his hands in the pockets of a battered brown jacket, looking for all the world like someone's slightly too large neighbor out for an evening stroll, which was exactly the impression he'd been going for. The artifact, a small disk of Atlantean orichalcum, etched with the deep-tide runes of the Second Dynasty, had been pulsing against his ribs since he'd crossed into Surrey, warm and insistent the way old magic gets when it recognizes something nearby. He'd been expecting to find it buried under someone's garden, or tucked behind a loose brick in a wall somewhere. Old Atlantean artifacts had a tendency to wash up in strange places, carried by underground waterways that connected more of the surface world to the deep than surface people ever suspected. He hadn't expected it to lead him to a 6-year-old boy sitting on a concrete doorstep in the pouring rain. The boy was small. Too small, something in Arthur's chest said immediately, and the part of him that was always cataloging threats and sizes and vulnerabilities, the part forged in Atlantean training halls and too many battles to count, filed that away with quiet alarm. He was sitting with his knees pulled to his chest, arms wrapped around them, wearing clothes that were so many sizes too large they looked like someone had dressed a sparrow in a tent. His hair was black and stuck flat against his forehead by the rain, and he had a pair of round glasses that were slightly bent on one side, the left lens cracked clean across. He wasn't crying. That was the thing that made Arthur slow his walk to a stop, standing on the pavement 10 feet away and just watching for a moment. The kid was absolutely soaked through, sitting on a concrete step in the dark, and he wasn't crying. He had the stillness of someone who'd learned that crying didn't help, and that particular stillness, Arthur knew it, had worn it himself in ways he didn't often think about, hit him somewhere behind the sternum. The orichalcum disc was burning now. Arthur crossed the street. "Hey," he said, keeping his voice easy, the way he'd learned to do with frightened things. "Rough night?" The boy looked up, and Arthur saw 2 things simultaneously. First, the kid's eyes were an extraordinary green, the specific shade of deep coastal water where the shelf drops away and the light starts changing, a color Arthur had only ever seen at depth. Second, there was a scar on his forehead, small and pale, shaped like a bolt of lightning, and the moment Arthur's eyes found it the disc against his ribs flared so hot he almost reached for it. "I'm fine," the boy said. His voice was polite and carefully neutral in the way that children's voices get when they've been trained to be invisible. "You're sitting in the rain," Arthur pointed out. "I'm aware." Arthur almost smiled at that. "Almost. What's your name?" A small hesitation. Long enough that Arthur noted it. "Harry." "How old are you, Harry?" 6. Then, after a pause that carried the weight of a much older kid's calculation, "How old are you?" "Older than I look," Arthur said. He glanced at the door behind Harry, number 4, a perfectly ordinary door on a perfectly ordinary house that was, he noted, completely dark inside despite the lights being on in every neighboring house on the street. "Is this your house?" "Yes." "Then why are you sitting outside in the rain?" Harry looked at him for a long moment. The rain kept falling. A car went by somewhere on the next street over, headlights sweeping briefly across the wet pavement. "I forgot to do something," Harry said finally. "What did you forget?" Another careful pause. "I made a mistake." Arthur crouched down so he was at eye level with him, and the orichalcum disc blazed against his chest hard enough that he had to actively not react, just kept his eyes on the kid and kept his voice steady. "What kind of mistake?" Harry looked at him with those impossible green eyes, and Arthur saw him make a decision, the specific decision of a child who has been burned enough times by honesty that he'd learned to wrap truth in the safest version of itself. "I accidentally broke something." And then Aunt Petunia locked the door. The rain fell. Arthur looked at the dark windows of number 4, Privet Drive, and felt something move in him that was old and not gentle and very, very certain. "How long have you been out here?" he asked. "Since before dinner." "Have you eaten?" The look Harry gave him then was the one that answered the question without a word, the faint, practiced incomprehension of a kid who wasn't sure what eating dinner reliably felt like. Arthur reached into his jacket pocket, felt past the disc, and pulled out a protein bar he'd had since leaving the coast, not much, a little battered, but it was there. He held it out. Harry looked at it for exactly 2 seconds before taking it, and the speed with which he unwrapped it and started eating told Arthur everything he needed to know about number 4, Privet Drive, and whatever was happening behind its perfectly ordinary dark windows. He sat down on the step beside Harry, which made the step fairly crowded because Arthur was not a small man, and waited. Harry ate the protein bar. Then he looked at the wrapper very carefully, folded it in precise halves, and held it. "You don't have to keep that," Arthur said. "I know," Harry said, and kept it anyway. Arthur reached slowly into his jacket and pulled out the orichalcum disc, letting it rest on his open palm between them. It was the size of a large coin, dark gold, etched all over with runes so fine they looked almost like lace in the wet lamplight. And it was glowing, a deep, steady blue-green, the color of bioluminescent water at a kilometer down, pulsing with a rhythm that was almost like breathing. Harry stared at it. His hand moved before he apparently decided it was going to, reaching out and then stopping just short, fingers hovering. "It won't hurt you," Arthur said. "Go ahead." Harry touched it with one fingertip. The disc leapt off Arthur's palm. Not violently, it didn't fly across the street or crack the pavement or do anything that the neighbors would come out to investigate. It simply rose, about 3 inches off Arthur's hand, rotating slowly in the air between them, and the light it was putting out changed from blue-green to something deeper, something more, a color that didn't have a surface world name, a color that existed only at the heart of the oldest parts of the ocean. The runes on its surface rearranged. Arthur stared. In 10 years of carrying Atlantean artifacts, including a trident that had once belonged to a god, he had never seen one of the old discs rearrange its own runes. Not once. Not for anyone. Harry was watching it with an expression of absolute, transparent wonder, the most unguarded thing Arthur had seen on his face, and the disc was orbiting his outstretched finger like a small, very dedicated moon. "What is it?" Harry whispered. "Very old magic," Arthur said. He was choosing his next words with more care than he'd chosen anything in a long time. "It's from a place called Atlantis. You've heard of it?" "From stories." Harry didn't look away from the disc. "It's supposed to not be real." "Most things that are supposed to not be real are the most real things there are," Arthur said. "My name is Arthur. Arthur Curry. I'm the king of Atlantis." Harry finally looked at him. The disc kept its orbit. In the face of this information, Harry Potter, age 6, sitting soaked on a concrete step in the rain, said, "Is it underwater?" "Most of it, yes." "How do you breathe?" "I'm half Atlantean." "And there's magic involved." "A lot of magic." Arthur nodded at the disc. "That thing you're doing with it right now? That's not supposed to be possible. Not even for most Atlanteans." Harry looked back at the disc, then held very still. "Am I in trouble?" "No." Arthur said it immediately and completely. "You're not in trouble." "Harry, can I ask you something important?" "Okay. What happened to your parents?" The silence that followed had a particular texture. It was the silence of a wound that had been pressed on enough times that the kid had learned to build a wall around the pressing, to let you touch the wall and report back, "Yes, something is here, but I won't let you through." "They died," Harry said. "In a car crash. I was a baby. That's what my aunt and uncle told me." Arthur looked at the scar on the boy's forehead, at the orichalcum disc rotating in impossible defiance of every rule he knew about the artifacts of the Second Dynasty, and at the faint luminescence that was, now that he was looking for it, coming off the kid's skin in a way that had nothing to do with the lamplight. He knocked on the door of number 4. The lights were, apparently, all off upstairs. It took 2 more knocks before the hallway light came on, visible through the frosted glass panel above the letter slot, and then the door opened and a tall, thin woman with a long neck and an expression like someone perpetually smelling something was looking out at him. Her eyes went immediately to Harry. "Get inside," she said, and it wasn't a concerned parent's relief, it was a command, irritated and flat. "Actually," Arthur said, "I'd like to talk to you first." The woman, he had no doubt this was Aunt Petunia, looked at Arthur with the specific appraisal of someone who judged everything by its surface presentation and found him lacking in some category of respectability. He was very large, his jacket was wet, he hadn't shaved in 4 days, and he was standing on her step at 9 in the evening next to her nephew. "I don't know who you are," she said. "Arthur Curry." He smiled, and it was the smile he used in Atlantean throne rooms when he needed someone to understand that pleasantries were a courtesy he was extending, not a vulnerability he was displaying. "I'm a friend of Harry's parents. Or I was. Can I come in?" "It's late," Petunia said, already starting to close the door. Arthur put his hand against the door. Not forcefully, he didn't need force, and he wasn't going to use it on a woman in a doorway in front of the child he was already privately, instinctively starting to think of as someone he needed to protect. He just put his hand against it and held it still, and met her eyes, and let her see in his face that the door was going to stay open for this conversation. "Harry was sitting in the rain," he said. His voice was quiet. "He told me he's been out here since before dinner. He's 6 years old." Petunia's expression did something complicated and failed to land anywhere that resembled shame. "He was being punished for breaking. He's 6, Arthur said again, and he was sitting in the rain. In the dark. Without having eaten." He paused. "I'm not here to cause you trouble. I'm here because I knew his parents, and I'd like to understand what's happening to him in this house." "What's happening," Petunia said, her voice brittle and sharp, "is that we took him in out of the goodness of our hearts when we had no obligation to, and we've been feeding him and clothing him and putting a roof over his head for 5 years, he's wearing his cousin's old clothes," Arthur said. He'd glanced at the boy when he stood up, seen the initials DD embroidered on the collar. "Clothes that are 4 sizes too big. And he's been outside for hours, in November, without a coat." The silence stretched. From somewhere deeper in the house came the sound of a television, and the heavy tread of a large man, and then Vernon Desley appeared in the hallway, enormous, red-faced, with a mustache that was doing aggressive things on his face, and looked from Petunia to Arthur to Harry with the expression of a man whose evening had been going perfectly and was now about to go somewhere he didn't want it to go. "Who the devil are you?" Vernon demanded. "Someone you really don't want to be rude to right now," Arthur said pleasantly. "I'm going to take Harry inside and get him dry and fed, and then you and I are going to have a conversation about his living situation. After that, we'll figure out where things go from here." "You will not." Vernon started forward, and Arthur held up one hand, and the air in the doorway seemed to change, the way it changes right before a lightning storm when the pressure drops and every hair on your arm stands up. Vernon stopped. He didn't know why he stopped. His body had decided for him. "Yes," Arthur said, in exactly the same pleasant tone, "I will." He looked down at Harry, who was watching all of this from the step with an expression that had moved, cautiously and with evident disbelief, from carefully neutral towards something that might have been hope. "Come on," Arthur said. "Let's get you warmed up." Harry came inside. The inside of number 4 told its own story, and Arthur read it the way he read ocean formations, in layers, each one informing the next. The living room had a large sofa, a large television, and a very large boy's worth of toys scattered across a pristine carpet. The kitchen was tidy, recently wiped down, smelling of a good dinner. There was no second plate at the table. The refrigerator, when Arthur opened it on the pretext of finding Harry something to eat, had a shelf that was clearly designated, by its emptiness, as Harry's. A single apple and half a carton of milk that was 3 days from expiring. He fed Harry properly. He found bread and made toast and found eggs and scrambled them, working through Petunia's protests with a calm efficiency that left no opening for argument, keeping half his attention on Harry sitting at the kitchen table, eating with the focused intensity of someone who was never entirely sure when food was happening next, and half on Vernon, who was standing in the doorway having the silent, volcanic internal debate of a man who wanted very much to be physically intimidating and had encountered a significant obstacle in the form of Arthur Curry's existence. "We haven't done anything illegal," Vernon said finally, unable to contain it. "We took the boy in. We didn't have to." "His kind aren't his kind," Arthur said, cracking a second egg. "His sort," Vernon amended, as if this were better, "their trouble. Always have been. His father was a waste of space and his mother was a—" "I'm going to stop you there," Arthur said, and the quiet in his voice was absolute and complete, the kind of quiet that has depth to it, and Vernon stopped. "Because the next words out of your mouth were going to be something you'd regret, and I'm trying to keep this evening civil." He put the plate in front of Harry, who ate. Arthur leaned against the counter and looked at Vernon Dursley and Petunia Dursley, who had appeared beside her husband, and he took stock of them with the clear-eyed assessment he used on everyone he needed to understand quickly. They weren't monsters, he decided, in the dramatic sense. They were small people, small in spirit, small in their capacity for anything that challenged the precise, defended ordinariness they'd built their lives around, and they had been handed a child who was the living embodiment of everything they feared and resented, and they had done what small people do with things that frighten them. They had made it smaller. They had been working on making Harry smaller for 5 years. The thought made something cold move through Arthur's chest. "Here's what's going to happen," he said, and the conversation shifted because his voice shifted, not louder, not harsher, but different in a way that both Dursleys felt without being able to name. "I'm going to take Harry with me tonight. Not permanently, yet, there are things I need to sort out, legalities and otherwise. But tonight, he's coming with me." "You can't just take," Petunia started. "I can," Arthur said. "And I will. And you're going to let me, because the alternative is that I have a much longer conversation with you about the last 5 years, and I'm going to want specific answers to specific questions, and I don't think you want that conversation." Petunia pressed her lips together and said nothing. "There's also something else you should know," Arthur said, and now he looked at them both very directly. "The reason I came to this street tonight has to do with Harry specifically. He's not ordinary. I think you know that. I think that's most of the problem, isn't it? He does things. Strange things. And instead of understanding what that means, instead of getting any sort of help or information, you just, what? Punished him for it? It's not natural," Petunia said, and her voice had gone thin and strange, and underneath the brittleness was something that might have been fear, and Arthur thought, "She knows. She knows exactly what she has and she has no idea what to do with it and she is terrified of it and she has been taking that terror out on a 6-year-old child for 5 years. It's extremely natural," Arthur said. "Where he comes from, it's normal. And where he also comes from, which is a place that's a long way from Surrey, it's also normal." He looked at Harry, who had finished eating and was watching this exchange with the peculiar alertness of a child who has learned to read rooms the way survivalists read weather. "You ready to go?" Harry looked at the plate. Then at the table. Then at Arthur. "Where are we going? Tonight?" "A hotel." "After that," Arthur paused. "After that, we're going to figure some things out. Together." Harry was quiet for a moment. Then, "Can I get my things?" "What things do you have?" Another of those pauses that said more than the words that followed. "Not very much." "Then yes. Go get them." Harry went up the stairs, and Arthur listened to the small footsteps overhead, just one room, no delay, like he'd made the decision long before anyone asked, and then looked back at the Dursleys. "You should know," he said, "that I'm going to look into what's been happening here. Not tonight. But soon. And if I find things I don't like," he left it there, unfinished, because finished would have been a threat and he wasn't quite in the business of threatening civilians, even civilians who deserved it. Vernon had gone the color of old brick, but he didn't say anything. Petunia was looking at the table. Harry came back down with a pillowcase that had been used as a bag, containing 3 books, a broken toy soldier, a photograph that Arthur caught a glimpse of, a young woman with red hair and green eyes, exactly Harry's green eyes, and a sweater that was the right size for him, which suggested it was the one thing they'd actually bought for him and not handed down from Dudley. He stood in the hallway with his makeshift bag and looked at his aunt and uncle. "Goodbye," he said. "Polite. Careful." And then, so quietly it might have been imagined, "I'll try not to be a bother." Petunia opened her mouth. Arthur moved Harry gently through the door before whatever she was going to say could land. They walked down the drive in the rain, and Harry didn't look back. Arthur noticed that. He noticed the deliberate, careful not looking, the way you don't look back at a place when looking back might crack the thing you've built that gets you through. "That was brave," Arthur said. "It wasn't brave," Harry said. "I've been wanting to leave since I was 4. Arthur looked down at him. "How did you know you wanted to leave at 4? "Because Dudley told me that's when you're old enough to know if somewhere is wrong," Harry said, with the devastating, offhand logic of a child quoting something heard and turned over many times, "and that place felt wrong since I can remember." They walked in silence for a block. The rain had softened to a drizzle, and the lamplight made halos in the mist. "Arthur?" Harry said. "Yeah." "The gold disc. The glowing one." A pause. "Did you know it was going to do that? When I touched it?" "No," Arthur said honestly. "I've never seen one do that for anyone." "What does it mean?" Arthur thought about how to answer that, thought about Second Dynasty bloodlines, about the oldest Atlantean records, about the runes that had rearranged themselves under Harry's single touch to spell out something that Arthur, who was reasonably fluent in Old Atlantean, had needed several seconds to process because the runes had spelled out, in the high formal script of the ancient throne documents, the word, heir. "It means," he said, "that you're going to have a very interesting life." Harry considered this. More interesting than sitting on doorsteps in the rain? Significantly. The hint of something that wasn't quite a smile moved across Harry's face, there and gone, like light on water. "Good," he said. They checked into a hotel outside of Surrey. Arthur got Harry his own room but kept the connecting door open, and spent 20 minutes going back and forth about whether Harry needed anything else to eat, a conversation that Harry answered by falling asleep in approximately 3 minutes the moment he was horizontal on a bed with actual pillows, still in his clothes, his makeshift bag clutched loosely in one hand. Arthur sat in the chair between the rooms and thought for a long time. Then he made a phone call to Atlantis. Mara picked up on the second ring, which meant she'd been awake, which meant she'd been working, which was neither surprising nor something he was going to comment on. "The artifact," he said, without preamble. "Did you find it?" she asked. In a manner of speaking. "Mara," he stopped. "Tried again. I need you to pull the old bloodline records. The Second Dynasty cross-lineage manifests, the ones that tracked the surface world descendants." A pause. "Arthur, those records are old, I know. Locked, I know. Pull them anyway." He looked through the connecting doorway at the small dark-haired boy asleep on the hotel bed. "I found something. Someone. And the disc didn't just react to him, Mara. It rearranged." The silence on the other end was the specific silence of his wife computing something at speed. "Rearranged to what?" "Air," Arthur said. Another silence. Longer this time. "Arthur." Her voice was very careful. "That word in the old script has a specific designation. It doesn't mean descendant. It means, I know what it means," he said. "Then you know that if it's real, the implications are, I know." He paused. "He's 6 years old, Mara. He's been living in a house where they fed him last because they ran out of other food. He's wearing clothes his cousin outgrew. He has one photograph of his parents and 3 books and a broken toy soldier." Mara was quiet. "His mother was a witch," Arthur continued. "From what I can piece together, powerful one. And whatever killed his parents, he was there for it. That scar on his forehead is not a normal scar. It's not Atlantean either. It's something else entirely, and it's old, and it's been doing something I can't identify. You already decided, Mara said. It was not an accusation. I already decided, he agreed. Arthur, the council can register a formal complaint directly to my face, he said, and I'll read it very carefully right before I ignore it. He leaned back in the chair. I need those bloodline records. And I need you to prepare the secondary chambers in the east wing. The ones with the windows. The windows that look out into the water gardens. He's going to need to see something beautiful, Arthur said, when he wakes up for the first time in a place that wants him there. Mara was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again her voice had changed in a way that Arthur recognized, softer, more careful, the voice she used for things that mattered more than she intended to show. How old did you say he was? 6. Does he know how to swim? We'll find out in the morning. Arthur. What? You're not going to tell me this is temporary, are you? He looked at the connecting doorway again. At the small shape in the big bed. At the makeshift pillowcase bag clutched in one small fist even in sleep, held like something precious, because it was the only precious thing he had. No, Arthur said. I'm not going to tell you that. He heard her exhale, and then the specific sound of her chair moving, which meant she was already pulling records. In the morning, he took Harry to the coast. They drove down before the sun was fully up, Harry in the passenger seat with his bent glasses and his carefully folded hands and a curiosity he was clearly restraining to a polite simmer, watching the countryside shift and flatten and then, eventually, the first gray glimmer of the sea on the horizon. Arthur watched Harry's face when the sea appeared, and watched the restraint crack, just slightly, the boy leaning almost imperceptibly forward, pressing slightly closer to the window, as if the glass were something that could be moved through if you wanted it badly enough. They parked at a beach that was empty at this hour, gray sand and gray water and a cold autumn sky just beginning to think about going pink. Arthur got out and Harry got out and they stood at the top of the beach, and Harry looked at the ocean with an expression that Arthur had seen on very few faces in his life, the expression of someone recognizing something they have never encountered before but nonetheless know. Have you ever seen the ocean? Arthur asked. No, Harry said. And then, but it feels like I have. He walked down the beach without being told. Not running, walking, with purpose, the way you walk towards something you've been waiting for, and Arthur followed a few steps behind and watched Harry crouch at the waterline, where the small waves came in and went out, and reached down and let the water run over his fingers. The wave that came in next was larger than the others. Not dangerously, not dramatically, just larger, coming up around Harry's trainers, already soaked, already ruined, and completely unnoticed, and when it pulled back it left something behind, a small crab, sitting in the wet sand, which oriented immediately toward Harry and then moved toward him with the decisive, specific directedness of something with a destination in mind. Harry watched the crab come to him. He held very still. It climbed onto his hand and he looked at it with absolute, luminous wonder. Hello, he said to it. The crab did the thing crabs do, which involved its eye stalks and a slight adjustment of its front claws, and Harry laughed. It was the first time Arthur had heard him laugh. It was a real laugh, unguarded, startled out of him, and it sounded like something that hadn't been used much and was glad to be getting some exercise. Arthur sat down on a dry rock and watched the king of Atlantis' recently acquired ward make friends with a crab in the grey autumn morning, and felt something settle in him like an anchor finding the seabed. He pulled out the orichalcum disc, which had been quietly warm since last night and was now the steady, comfortable temperature of sunlit water. He turned it over in his fingers and read the rearranged runes again, the ones that had locked into place when Harry touched it and had not moved since. The full line read, "The heir of tides returns. The two shall be one kingdom. He who bears the lightning and the deep shall hold both thrones." He'd studied Atlantean history for most of his adult life, had fought his way through the ancient texts and the dynastic records in the years after he'd taken the throne, trying to understand the world he'd inherited. He knew this kind of prophecy script. He knew how seriously the court took it. He also knew that prophecies could be read 12 different ways and were frequently used by people with agendas to justify whatever they already wanted to do. But he'd also put his hand out and watched this disc, a piece of Second Dynasty Atlantean orichalcum that had been dormant for over 300 years, leap into the air and orbit a 6-year-old boy's finger like a moon finding its planet. He wasn't a man who needed a prophecy to tell him something was true. He had eyes. Harry came back up the beach with wet feet and the expression of someone who had been told the world was one size and had just found out it was considerably larger. The crab was still on his hand, riding solemnly. "I think I should put him back," Harry said, and crouched to return the crab carefully to the waterline. "He's got things to do, probably." "Probably," Arthur agreed. Harry stood up and looked at him. "You said last night we'd figure things out. Together." His voice was doing the thing again, careful, calibrated, the hope wrapped in enough reserve that it could be retreated from if necessary. "Did you mean that?" "I meant it." "You're a king," Harry said, processing this very seriously. "Of a whole kingdom. Underwater." "I am." "And you want to," he stopped, rearranged whatever he'd been about to say. "What exactly are you thinking?" "For figuring things out." Arthur looked at him. The morning light was coming in pink and gold now, cutting across the beach, and it caught Harry in a way that made the faint luminescence Arthur had noticed last night more visible, something in the kid's skin that wasn't quite magic in the Atlantean sense and wasn't quite the surface world magic Arthur had encountered before, but was something adjacent to both. Something that sat at the intersection like it was exactly where it was supposed to be. "I'm thinking," Arthur said, "that you should come to Atlantis. See it. Meet Mara, she's my wife. We'd introduce you to the city, the people." He paused. "And after that, if you want to, if it feels right, I'd like you to stay. With us. Long term." Harry looked at the ocean. "You're not doing this because you feel sorry for me." It wasn't a question, which told Arthur something important about this kid. "No," Arthur said. "I'm doing it because that disc has been locked for 300 years and it moved for you. Because you sat in the rain for 3 hours without crying and you saved a protein bar wrapper and you said goodbye to people who didn't deserve it and you called that crab, and put him back carefully." He met Harry's eyes. "And because the ocean recognized you the second you touched it. I don't dismiss things like that." Harry looked at him for a long, measuring moment. 6 years old and already looking at the world through the eyes of someone who'd learned that good things had conditions, that adults came with catches, that wanting something too openly was a form of vulnerability. Then, carefully, precisely, like someone placing a bet they'd thought through completely, Harry said, "Okay." "Okay," Arthur said. "What's it like?" Harry asked, looking out at the water. "Underwater. What does it actually look like?" Arthur thought about how to answer that, the bioluminescent forests of deep coral, the way the light falls in cathedral shafts through the surface 300 meters above, the towers of Atlantis rising in crystalline gold green, the vast warm dark of the deep trenches, the living light of things that have never needed the sun. "Like nothing you've ever seen," he said. "Like everything you've ever imagined." Harry looked at the ocean. "When do we go?" he asked. "Today," Arthur said. "If you want." Harry turned, and this time the not-quite smile was actually a smile, small, careful, but real. "I want," he said. They went. The entry into the ocean was something Arthur had done hundreds of times, but watching Harry experience it for the first time added something to the familiar that he hadn't expected. He held Harry's hand as they went under, waded in from the beach until the water was at Arthur's waist, then crouched so he was level with Harry and looked him in the eye and said, "You'll be able to breathe. I know that sounds impossible. Trust me." Harry looked at the water. Looked at Arthur. "I trust you," he said, which coming from this specific kid felt like something much larger than the words. They went under. Harry breathed. He breathed water the way fish breathe water, automatically, easily, naturally, with the shocked expression of someone expecting to drown who has instead discovered flight. His eyes went enormous behind his cracked glasses, and Arthur saw the moment the ocean took him, the moment it recognized him back, the current shifting, the temperature rising very slightly, the fish in their immediate vicinity orienting toward Harry the way they'd orient toward a reef, toward something that belonged. Then the light changed as they went deeper, the gray surface above giving way to blue-green, then to the deep iridescence of the approach to Atlantis, and Harry's grip on Arthur's hand tightened, not in fear, in something else, something that had the quality of a held breath, of being on the edge of something enormous. Atlantis came into view. It always took the breath away, even Arthur's, still, after years. The towers catching the deep ocean light and throwing it back in every direction, the movement of the city's life visible even from distance, the great bioluminescent lattices of the living architecture, the thousand-year-old scale of it rendered suddenly, completely present. Harry said nothing. His hand was locked around Arthur's, and he floated at Arthur's side with his eyes tracking across the city from one end to the other, and his face was the face of someone whose understanding of the possible was in the process of being permanently revised. Then he pointed. At one of the towers, where a school of silver fish was moving in formation around the spire, spiraling upward in a helix that was, Arthur had to admit, objectively spectacular. That, Harry said, around a mouthful of water that was also somehow just speech, is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Wait till you see the inside, Arthur said. They went in. Mara was waiting at the main entry chamber, which connected to the surface docking ports through a series of airlock transitions that handled the pressure differential. She'd clearly just come from working, her hair was doing the thing it did when she'd had it tied back and then freed it, and she was standing with her arms crossed and the specific expression she wore when she was managing an emotion she hadn't decided what to do with yet. Arthur watched her see Harry, this tiny, soaked, bespectacled kid with the lightning scar and the makeshift bag and the wonder written so plainly on his face that it was almost painful to look at directly, and watched the managed expression shift into something else entirely. Harry, Arthur said, this is Mara. My wife. Harry looked up at her. She was tall, and she was carrying the kind of presence that filled rooms, and she was wearing the expression of someone recalibrating from a distance. Hello, Harry said. His voice was polite. And then, with the devastating directness of a child who has spent 5 years in a house where sincerity was punished and has stored up a treasury of it for somewhere safe, you have really red hair. Mara blinked. Then she crouched, exactly as Arthur had crouched on the privet drive step, and looked at Harry at eye level, and something in her face went very, very gentle. You have green eyes, she said. Do you know what color the ocean is, in the deep places where the light changes? Harry shook his head. That color, she said. Exactly that. Harry looked at her for a moment. Then he held out his hand, the one that had been holding the orichalcum disc earlier, and the disc rose immediately from Arthur's pocket, passing through the fabric without tearing it, which was a new trick, and floated to hover between them, its light the color of deep water, its runes steady and certain. Mara looked at the disc. Then at Harry. Then at Arthur, one swift cutting look that said I see, and said that's what you meant, and said I understand now why you called. Can I show you where you'll be staying, she said to Harry. Yes please, Harry said. Mara stood, and Harry fell into step beside her, and Arthur walked behind them through the corridors of his city, watching his wife and this 6-year-old boy who had rearranged a 300-year-old prophecy disc with a single touch, walking together through the living light of Atlantis. In the chamber Mara had prepared, the east wing rooms with the windows that looked out into the water gardens, where the deep ocean flowers grew in impossible slow colors and the fish moved like thoughts through the dim warm light, Harry stood at the window for a long time without speaking. Then he put his hand on the glass, the way he'd put it against the car window watching the sea come into view, leaning slightly toward it. I've never had a room, he said. Arthur and Mara were both quiet. I had a cupboard, Harry continued, still looking at the water gardens. Under the stairs. That's where I slept. His voice was entirely matter-of-fact. Not performing hurt, not looking for reaction, just stating it, the way you state the weather. It had a spider. I called him something, but I don't remember now. Mara made a sound that was not quite a word. This has a much better view than a spider, Harry said, and turned around, and his face was doing the smile thing again, the real one, the one that was still learning how to be a full smile, and he looked at the room, the actual room, with its Atlantean crystalwork and its warm amber light and the window full of living ocean, and said, "Is this really mine?" "Yes," Mara said, in a voice that was firmer and more certain than it needed to be for the question, the way you say a thing when you need to make absolutely sure it lands. "It's really yours." Harry nodded. "Took it in. Tucked it somewhere." "Thank you," he said, to both of them, with a gravity and completeness that hit somewhere below the ribs. Arthur Curry had faced sea monsters, godlike weapons, political coups, and his own brother across a battlefield. He was fairly certain none of those things had affected him quite like that. He and Mara exchanged a glance over Harry's head as the boy turned back to the window, the kind of glance that doesn't need words, that is its own entire conversation, and he saw in her eyes the same thing he felt in his chest, settled, certain, already done deciding. Harry pressed his hand to the glass, and in the water gardens outside, the deep ocean flowers turned toward him, slow and luminous, the way things turn toward a source of light. He was home. Chapter 2, Tides and Tridents. The first time Harry made the ocean do something it wasn't supposed to do, he was 7 years old and arguing with a fish. It wasn't a small fish. It was a deep-water grouper the size of a dining table, one of the old ones that patrolled the outer gardens of Atlantis with the self-important energy of something that had been large for a very long time and expected deference for it. Harry had been swimming his usual morning circuit, a route he'd mapped out himself in the 3 months since arriving, threading between the crystal spires of the east wing and out through the gap in the garden wall where the current ran warm, when the grouper had simply stopped in the middle of the passage and refused to move, regarding him with one enormous golden eye and the expression of an animal that has decided this corridor belongs to it. Harry had stopped, looked at the fish, and said, "I need to get through." The grouper had said, in the way fish say things, in current and pressure and the specific quality of its stillness, "No. I'm not going around," Harry said. "It takes 20 minutes and the current's bad on the west side." The grouper blinked its enormous eye. "I'll come back later and bring you something," Harry said. "There's those big purple urchins near the third pillar that you like. I've seen you eating them." A pause. The water shifted slightly. "Deal?" Harry said. The grouper moved. Not all the way, it slid sideways just enough to let Harry through with about 3 inches of clearance on each side, which was its version of a concession, and Harry swam through and said, "Thank you, I'll be back by midday," and the fish watched him go with a golden eye that had the look of something that had made a reasonable business arrangement. Arthur was at the garden wall entry, hands on the stone, watching this interaction with an expression that had stopped being surprised somewhere around the second week and had settled into a kind of deep, entertained wonder. "You're negotiating with wildlife again," he said. "He was blocking the passage," Harry said. "He does that every morning. He's done it for 11 years. Everyone else goes around." "Going around is inefficient," Harry said, and swam past him into the training courtyard, pulling off his outer layer to get down to the practice gear that Mara had made for him, Atlantean cut, scaled close to the body, charcoal and deep blue, with none of the stiffness of the too big surface clothes he'd arrived in. He'd grown in the 3 months. Not dramatically, not in ways that would have made the Dursleys notice or care, but in the particular way of a child who was being fed properly and sleeping through the night and using his body the way his body was designed to be used. He was cleaner in his movements, more settled in his balance, already developing the automatic water reading that Atlantean children spent years learning. The training courtyard was a wide open-sided space on the middle level of the east wing, open to the ocean on 3 sides, the water flowing through it at a gentle current that served as a training tool. Arthur had designed the session himself, modified Atlantean warrior school basics, stripped of the cultural complexity that Harry wasn't ready for yet, built around the physical fundamentals that even a 7-year-old could absorb. This morning was movement work. Reading current, moving with resistance, the principles of force and counterforce that underpinned every Atlantean combat form. Arthur demonstrated, and Harry copied, and within 40 minutes Harry was moving through the current patterns with a smoothness that Arthur had privately noted down the day before and hadn't mentioned yet, because he'd learned quickly that Harry responded better to working through something than to being told he was good at it. Then something happened that Arthur hadn't included in the lesson plan. Harry, mid-movement, hit a particularly stubborn countercurrent, the kind that came in from the northern channel on certain tide patterns and made the training courtyard genuinely difficult for even intermediate practitioners. He pushed against it, lost the movement pattern, felt the countercurrent pushing him back, and instead of resetting the way Arthur had taught him, he pushed. Not with his body. With something else. The water in the entire courtyard stopped. Not like a pond going still. Not like anything Arthur had ever produced himself, even with the full authority of the trident behind it. The water stopped the way time stops, absolutely, completely, all of it simultaneously, every current and microcurrent and random thermal gradient flattening to glassy, complete stillness, and Harry hung in it, suspended in the middle of the courtyard in silence so total it was its own kind of sound. Then it released, all at once, the currents rushing back in like an exhale, and Harry spun in the sudden turbulence and righted himself and looked at his hands. Arthur was very still at the courtyard's edge. "I didn't do that on purpose," Harry said. "I know," Arthur said. His voice was careful. "Do you feel all right?" Harry looked at the water around him. "What was that?" "I'm not entirely sure," Arthur said, which was true, and also not the complete story. He'd seen tide callers in the court do things with water. He'd seen Mara do things with water that still impressed him. He'd done things with water himself that weren't entirely explicable. But the complete simultaneous cessation of movement in a body of water of that volume, from a child, with no tools, no training, no intent, that was a category of thing he didn't have a tidy name for. He crossed the courtyard to Harry, crouched to eye level, still his default, always making himself level with Harry rather than above, which Harry had never commented on but which Arthur was fairly sure had not gone unnoticed. "Describe what you felt," he said. Harry thought about it with the serious, methodical quality he brought to everything. "The current was pushing wrong," he said. "Against the way I was trying to go. And I wanted it to stop." He paused. "And it stopped. Has anything like that happened before?" "Small things," Harry said. "Before. At Privet Drive." He used the name with the same tone he used for unpleasant facts, clearly, without drama, the way you name a thing to keep it from having power over you. "I used to make things happen when I was angry or scared. But not like that. That was different." "That was you," Arthur said. "That was you knowing what you wanted and the ocean agreeing." Harry looked at him. "The ocean doesn't just agree. Does it? For most people. No." Arthur held his gaze. "We're going to talk to Mara tonight. There are some records she's been reading that I think you should know about. About who your family is. Both sides." Harry was very still. "Both sides. Your mother was a witch," Arthur said. "A real one, from a world that exists alongside the regular surface world but separate from it. She was enormously powerful by their accounts. But what's in those records, what Mara found, goes back further than your mother. Further than her family line. It goes back to a point where the two worlds, Atlantis and the wizarding world, were closer together than they are now." He paused. "You're not just connected to Atlantis by proximity, Harry. It's in your blood. On both sides." Harry was quiet for a moment. "Then, is that why the disc moved?" "That's why the disc moved." Harry looked at his hands again. The water around them was fully back to normal, moving in its ordinary patterns, but Harry was watching it with new attention, the careful look of someone who has just been handed a map to a territory they've been living in without knowing. "Okay," he said. "What do I do?" "You keep training," Arthur said. And you let Mara explain the history. And you stop arguing with groupers. The grouper argument was productive, Harry said. You made a business arrangement with a fish. Efficient conflict resolution, Harry said, and Arthur made a sound that was definitely not a laugh. Mara had, over the past 3 months, become fluent in Harry in the way she became fluent in everything, completely, specifically, and with a thoroughness that left no ambiguity. She'd noted the way he approached new information, front on, without flinching, always preferring facts to comfortable half-truths. She'd noted the reading. He went through books at a pace that concerned her for the first week and then impressed her enormously, specifically because he didn't read to collect information, he read to understand systems, the connections between things, the logic under the surface. She'd also noted the way he watched Arthur. Not dependency. Not hero worship. Something more precise, the specific attention of a child who has been failed by adults enough times that he observes them carefully, catalogues their consistency, builds trust not on what they say but on the gap between what they say and what they do. Arthur said a thing and did it. Every time. Harry had been checking for approximately 11 weeks and had not yet found a discrepancy, and the effect this was having on him was visible as a kind of very gradual, very cautious opening, like a window being unlocked in a house that had been sealed for years. She'd had a conversation with Arthur about it, late, after Harry was in his room. He's waiting for the other shoe, she'd said. I know, Arthur said. We should be completely predictable. Consistent. No surprises in the wrong directions. I know, Mara. I'm not telling you something you don't know, she said. I'm saying it out loud because it helps me think. I know that too, he said, which was why she'd married him. The bloodline records she'd pulled were in the old vault, stored in deep-cured orichalcum leaf, the writing so fine it required specific lighting conditions to read at all. She'd spent 6 weeks with them and had arrived at a conclusion that she'd sat with alone for several days before telling Arthur, because it was the kind of conclusion that required sitting with. Harry's maternal line, his mother's family, traced back, on the surface, to a fairly ordinary English magical lineage several generations back. Ordinary in the wizarding world's terms, which meant nothing in the terms of what Mara was looking at. Because 6 generations before Lily Evans, on her mother's side, was a woman who appeared in both the wizarding records as a peculiarly gifted, wandless witch and in the Atlantean surface contact records as something else entirely, a woman who had been born in Cornwall in 1743, whose father had been a sailor who'd gone into the sea in a storm and come back 3 years later changed, who had spent the rest of his life unable to sleep more than 100 meters from the coast. His father had been Atlantean. Not metaphorically. Not distantly. Full-blooded surface-born Atlantean, part of the exile communities that had lived along the British and Irish coasts for 1,000 years, keeping the old ways, maintaining the blood connection to the deep. Harry Potter was not 1/4 Atlantean, or an eighth, or some trace percentage that required academic squinting to classify. The Atlantean bloodline in his mother's family had expressed powerfully in every generation it appeared and had in Harry, given his father's extremely rare magical genetics, given the circumstances of whatever had happened to him as an infant, given everything, converged and concentrated into something that the old records described in terms so formal and specific that Mara had read the passage 4 times before she was satisfied she was reading it correctly. She explained this to Harry over dinner, 3 months in the way she explained things, directly, with all the relevant facts, not softened and not expanded beyond what was true. Harry sat at the table and listened. He ate and listened, and did not interrupt, and at the end he said, "So it's not just the disc. It's always been in my family." "Yes," Mara said. "For centuries. And the wizarding magic, my mum's side, the actual witch part, that's separate. It's different from the Atlantean part." "Different in form," Mara said. "They come from different sources, developed through different histories. But in you, the records suggest, and what we've seen confirms, they don't run separately. They're woven together." Harry thought about this. "So when I stopped the water today, that was Atlantean," Arthur said. "But the things that happened at Privet Drive. When I was scared and things moved, or, there was a time I ended up on the school roof. I was running from Dudley and suddenly I was just, there. On the roof. That was wizarding, Mara said. Accidental apparition. Very advanced even for trained adults. One power, two sources, Harry said. Yes, Mara said. Harry sat with that, eating methodically, working through it. What does that mean for training? Do I train them separately or together? Arthur and Mara looked at each other over the table. Both, Mara said. And eventually, together. But you're 7, so, I can start now, Harry said. Yes, Mara said, which was why Harry liked her. She never said you're too young when what she meant was this is going to be complex and take time, because those were different things, and Harry understood complex and time. Can I read the records? Harry said. Mara paused. They're in Old Atlantean. Then I'll learn Old Atlantean, Harry said. Arthur made the sound that was definitely not a laugh again. He learned Old Atlantean. It took him 4 months, which was faster than anyone expected except Mara, who had set the timetable and had set it at 4 months because she'd watched him reading for 3 months first. He learned it the way he learned everything, not by memorizing it as a foreign system but by finding its internal logic, the grammar of it, the underlying structure, and then reading it like he read English, whole thought rather than word by word. By the time he was 8, he was reading the bloodline records himself, cross-referencing them against the dynastic histories in the main archive, building a picture of both his family lines that was more complete than anything Arthur or Mara had assembled, because he had the specific motivation of someone building a map of themselves. His father's side, the Potters, the James Potter line, went back to the wizarding world's own ancient families, with magic of a different character than his mother's, more traditional in form, generationally refined rather than raw and wild. The Atlantean bloodline did not appear on his father's side. But something else did, a pattern in the Potter line, going back centuries, of individuals who appeared in the wizarding world's own historical records with a note that Mara confirmed was significant, touched by ancient compact. What's the ancient compact? Harry asked Arthur, the day he found it. Arthur was quiet for a moment. The oldest agreement between Atlantis and the surface wizarding world. Made before either civilization became what it is now. It established certain boundaries. And certain connections. What kind of connections? Bloodlines, Arthur said. Specifically, the agreement that certain surface magical families and certain Atlantean families would maintain enough contact and crossing, that neither world would ever become entirely separate from the other. Harry looked at him. So my parents weren't random. I don't think so, Arthur said. And I'm not random, Harry said. It wasn't a question. It had the quality of someone completing an equation, putting the final number in place and then sitting with the answer. No, Arthur said. I don't think you are either. Harry nodded, once, and went back to his reading with the focused satisfaction of someone who has confirmed a long-held hypothesis. He was 8. By 9, the training had become serious in the way serious things become when the person being trained stops treating them as instruction and starts treating them as language, a fluency project, a becoming native in a way that goes past technique into reflex. Arthur had brought in a weapons master, an Atlantean named Calder who was young for a senior position and excellent at it, quiet and precise and patient in a way that Harry responded to immediately. Calder ran the physical training, movement, combat fundamentals, waterworking as an integrated practice rather than a separate discipline, and Arthur observed and occasionally intervened, not because Calder needed it but because he had difficulty staying away from Harry's training sessions, a fact that Mara had pointed out with great precision and zero mercy. You hover, she said. I observe, Arthur said. You sit in that alcove with your arms crossed and make faces when Calder corrects him. I disagree with some of Calder's corrections. Then speak to Calder about them instead of making faces in alcoves. I don't make faces. Arthur, she said, with the tone she used when she'd won and was giving him the chance to admit it gracefully. I may occasionally make a face, he said. What was actually happening, and what both of them knew without quite saying directly, was that watching Harry train was one of those experiences that was difficult to look away from, not because of the power, though the power was significant and growing in ways that were genuinely remarkable, but because of what was happening to Harry in it. The careful, defended stillness that he'd had when Arthur found him on the step, the stillness of someone who'd learned that taking up space caused problems, was being replaced, piece by piece, session by session, with something else. A presence. A comfort in his own body, in his own capabilities, in the simple physical fact of taking up space and having that be fine. The day Harry executed a full current redirect, pulling the training chamber's flow into a completely different pattern, redirected it, held it for 30 seconds, and then released it cleanly, Calder stopped the session and looked at him with an expression that, on Calder's usually very composed face, qualified as thunderstruck. "Who showed you that form?" he said. "No one," Harry said. "I worked it out from the third form principles. If you apply the counter-rotation concept from third form at the larger scale, the geometry should. No student in the Warrior School completes current redirect before their third year," Calder said. Harry considered this. "I've been doing the geometry on it for about 6 weeks," he said. "I think the traditional teaching order is slightly wrong. If you introduce the pressure differential theory earlier, the redirect becomes obvious from first principles, you don't need to treat it as a separate advanced technique." Calder looked at Arthur. Arthur, in the alcove, was making a face. It was a proud face. He was definitely making it. The political problem arrived when Harry was 10, on a Tuesday, in the form of Lord Nereus of the Atlantean Eastern Court, who was ORM's most prominent surviving loyalist and who had, for 4 years, been building a coalition of court nobles around the singular argument that the king's ward was an embarrassment to the realm. His objections were several. They were delivered through the proper channels, petitions to the court, formal challenges, committee formations, with the smooth efficiency of a man who had been working the political mechanisms of Atlantis since before Arthur's father was born. Harry was a surface child. Harry was not of pure Atlantean lineage. Harry was being trained in warrior arts and given access to the royal archives and, most provocatively, had been noted by 3 separate court scholars as capable of manipulating the deep currents in ways that were traditionally restricted to the royal bloodline. The petition Nereus finally filed, and which arrived on Arthur's desk on that Tuesday morning, requested a formal hearing before the full court to determine whether Harry's continued presence in Atlantis constituted a breach of the royal succession compact of the 5th dynasty. Arthur read it. He read it again. He put it down on the desk and looked at it with an expression that Mara, coming in with her morning tea, clocked immediately. "How bad?" she asked. "He's invoking the 5th dynasty compact," Arthur said. Mara was quiet for a moment. "That's not a small move." "No," Arthur said. "It's a direct challenge. In the old formal framework, invoking the compact requires me to either rebut it in open court or acknowledge its legitimacy. Rebutting it means making Harry's bloodline case in public. Showing the records, demonstrating the connection, putting it all in front of the full court." Arthur paused. "Which, honestly, at this point, isn't necessarily a problem. The bloodline case is solid. But it means Harry is involved. The court will want to see him, question him, they'll try to diminish him," Mara said flatly. "They'll ask him questions designed to demonstrate inadequacy. They'll use his age, his surface origin, his wizarding blood as—" "I know," Arthur said. "Then they don't get to question him," Mara said. "If it goes to court, he presents the case himself." Arthur looked at her. "Arthur, I've been watching him work for 4 years," she said. "He reads the archives better than half the court scholars. He speaks Old Atlantean. He's been studying the dynastic history specifically. I think he's been expecting something like this, actually. He watches the court politics. He pays attention." She set down her tea. "Let him handle it." Arthur thought about it for a longer moment than it looked like. "He's 10. He's Harry," she said. Which was, Arthur reflected, a complete argument. He told Harry that evening. He sat him down in the East Wing reading room, Harry's preferred space, with the high windows and the deep shelf archive access, and laid out the petition, the compact, the nature of the challenge, and what the hearing would involve. Harry listened. "Read the petition document, which Arthur had brought along. Read it twice. Put it down." "Nereus," he said. "You know him?" "I've been reading the court records," Harry said. "He was ORM's primary court support during the succession conflict. He lost his position when you took the throne but retained his title and his estate, and he's been building a block of second-tier nobles around the argument that your reign introduced too much surface-world influence into Atlantean culture." He looked up. "He's not wrong about the influence, he's just wrong about it being bad. And this petition isn't actually about me. It's about you. I'm the mechanism, you're the target." Arthur looked at him steadily. "Yes. He wants to embarrass you in open court," Harry said. "Make it look like you've created a succession question by attaching yourself to an unqualified outsider. Undermine the court's confidence in your judgment." He tapped the petition. "The compact invocation is elegant, actually. The Fifth Dynasty Compact was specifically about preventing foreign influence in the succession, which is," he's reading it broadly, "but it's a defensible read." "It is," Arthur agreed. "So we rebut with the bloodline records and the disk documentation," Harry said. "But that's only the technical argument. The political argument is different. The court nobles who are actually persuadable aren't going to care about bloodline charts. They're going to be watching whether I'm someone they should take seriously." He was quiet for a moment. "Can I address the court directly?" "I can request it," Arthur said. "Protocol allows for the subject of a compact challenge to speak in their own defense." "Then request it," Harry said. "Then, after a pause, don't tell me what to say. I'll work it out." Arthur looked at him across the reading table in the light of the deep-water windows. This kid who'd been sitting on a doorstep in the rain 4 years ago, clutching a makeshift bag with a broken toy soldier in it. This 10-year-old, reading Atlantean court documents with the specific alertness of someone who'd been paying attention to everything and was now going to use it. "Okay," Arthur said. "Can I have the full court attendance records for the last 8 years?" Harry said, already turning back to the documents. "I want to see who votes with Nereus consistently and who's actually independent." "I'll have them sent," Arthur said. He went to find Mara, and told her what Harry had said, and she listened, and when he finished she said, "I told you." "You told me," he agreed. The hearing was held in the Grand Petitions Chamber, which was the most formally significant space in Atlantis, a vast, columned hall lit by concentrated bioluminescent arrays, with the court's full seating tiers arranged in a semicircle around the central floor. It was designed, architecturally and ceremonially, to be impressive and to make whoever stood in the center of it feel small. Harry walked into it like he'd been in it 100 times. He was wearing proper court formal, Mara had insisted on that, the full Atlantean formal attire in the royal household's colors, which on Harry's slight, still-growing 10-year-old frame was either going to look ridiculous or authoritative, and it was, somehow, the second thing. Arthur was at the king's position on the raised dais. Mara was beside him. The court was full, Nereus had made sure of that, called in every alliance and favor to pack the tiers with bodies, so that whatever happened here had maximum witnesses. Nereus himself was a tall, elegant man of the kind of Atlantean old nobility that had been elegant for so many generations it had calcified into something closer to marble than flesh. He presented the petition with the smooth precision of long practice, citing clauses and precedents with the fluency of someone who'd been preparing this argument for years. Then Harry was given the floor. He stood in the center of the Grand Petitions Chamber, 10 years old, in court formal, and looked around at the assembled tiers with the patient, measuring look that Arthur had come to recognize as his specific variety of readiness, not aggressive, not nervous, but completely, deliberately present. "Lord Nereus has invoked the Fifth Dynasty Compact," Harry said. His voice in the chamber was clear and steady, carrying the old language formal register that court protocol required and that he'd been practicing for 3 weeks without telling anyone until Calder heard him in the training hall and reported back. "I've read the compact. I've also read the court records of the 5 formal interpretations of the compact since its signing, including the 7th reign deliberation of 1204, which is actually the most relevant precedent here and which Lord Nereus didn't cite. I think that's because the 1204 deliberation specifically clarifies that the compact's restriction on foreign succession applies to individuals with no established blood right, which excludes me, as the blood right documentation has been on record with the Royal Archive for 4 years. Nereus, in his tear, had gone very still. I've also read, Harry continued, the petition histories of Lord Nereus himself, going back 12 years. He's filed 19 formal petitions in that period. 17 of them opposed initiatives of King Arthur's that expanded surface world diplomatic contact or cultural exchange. The other 2 were about a property dispute with a neighboring estate. He looked directly at Nereus. I'm not suggesting Lord Nereus is acting in bad faith. I'm noting that his position on surface world involvement in Atlantis has been consistent for more than a decade, which means this petition is consistent with his known views and should be understood in that context. The chamber was very quiet. I'm not a threat to Atlantis, Harry said, and his voice shifted, still clear, still formal, but with something in it that was just Harry, the direct specific warmth of him that cut through ceremony without dismantling it. I'm part of it. By blood, by history, and by 4 years of living here, learning here, and caring about this place in the specific way you care about a place that chose you. He paused. The compact was written to protect Atlantis from foreign influence that would weaken it. I would like to suggest, respectfully, and with citations available, that the thing most likely to weaken Atlantis is not a 10-year-old with a complicated bloodline. It's the practice of treating every connection to the surface world as contamination instead of the strength it actually is. Which is, historically, the position that led to the isolation periods that the records show consistently damaged Atlantean innovation and political stability. He'd been doing this for about 4 minutes. The chamber tears, which had been the specific Atlantean court kind of murmuring when he'd started, were silent now. I'm happy to answer questions, Harry said. I'd particularly welcome them from the independent tier members, Lords Thessar, Corran, and Lady Varys, whose voting record suggests they engage with petitions on their actual merits. Lord Nereus's bloc will vote as they're going to vote regardless of what I say, so, a slight pause. I'd rather have a real conversation. Nereus rose from his seat. The boy demonstrates exactly the kind of, he started, and his voice had an edge, the edge of a man whose careful architecture has been walked through rather than walked around. Surface world arrogance. Harry said. Politely. Completely straight-faced. Presumption, Nereus said, and there was iron in it. Lord Nereus, Harry said, I looked up every scholar and court member who has ever made the bloodline argument against someone in this court. In every case without exception, the argument was made against someone with less court access than the person making it. The bloodline argument has a perfect record of coinciding with the political interests of whoever's invoking it. He met Nereus's eyes directly. That doesn't make the argument legally invalid. But it does mean the court should weigh it accordingly. The independent tier was, Arthur noted, paying very close attention. The hearing more actions right the next chapter now. Chapter 3, The Letter and the Storm. The owl arrived on a Wednesday in July, which was how Harry found out that the wizarding world had been looking for him. It came through the surface entry portal, the main one, the large pressure-equalized transit chamber on the eastern face of Atlantis that handled deliveries and diplomatic correspondence, and the transit officer on duty had sent it up to the East Wing with a note that said, simply, Surface Post, unusual method of delivery, which was the Atlantean Civil Service's version of we have absolutely no idea what to do with this. The owl was a large tawny, and it was deeply unhappy about being underwater, and it was expressing this unhappiness through a combination of ruffled feathers and the specific kind of affronted dignity that owls do better than any other animal. It had somehow managed to reach Atlantis despite the fact that Atlantis was 300 meters below the North Atlantic, which meant either wizarding post owls were more magically capable than anyone had documented, or the owl had been trying to reach Harry for long enough that it had figured something out through sheer stubborn persistence. Harry, coming into the transit room to collect it, looked at the owl, and the owl looked at him, and the letter attached to its leg had Mr. H. Potter, the King's East Wing, Atlantis written on it in green ink in handwriting that was either very confident or completely insane. "How did you even get here?" Harry said. The owl held out its leg with the specific patience of something that has been traveling for an embarrassingly long time and wants everyone to know it. Harry unclipped the letter. The owl took a long drink from the transit room's water feature, the freshwater one, the decorative basin near the door, which suggested the owl had the presence of mind to identify drinkable water from salt water, which elevated Harry's assessment of it considerably, and then settled on the railing and looked at him. He opened the letter. It was from Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, and it was an acceptance letter for the upcoming academic year, written in the formal manner of an institution that had been doing this for 1,000 years and saw no reason to change its tone. It listed required textbooks and equipment with the confidence of something that expected compliance. Underneath the Hogwarts letter was a second one, shorter, from someone named Albus Dumbledore, who described himself as headmaster. This letter was different, personal, warm in a specific way that had architecture to it, the warmth of someone who wrote letters with intention. It said that Dumbledore was aware Harry had been living abroad, that the wizarding world was very much looking forward to welcoming him, and that Dumbledore himself would be honored to meet Harry at his earliest convenience to discuss, as he put it, certain matters of particular importance. Harry read both letters twice. Then he looked at the owl, which had finished its water and was watching him. "Certain matters of particular importance," Harry said. The owl blinked. "Do you know what those are?" The owl did not seem to know what those were. Harry took both letters and went to find Arthur and Mara. He found them together in Arthur's working study, which was one of the few rooms in the East Wing that had no windows looking outward, because Arthur claimed he thought better without the view, and Mara claimed she thought better with the view, and the compromise was that Arthur's study had no windows and Mara's study had 4, sitting on opposite ends of the long central table with papers between them, which was their usual working configuration. He put both letters on the table between them without preamble. They read. The silence had different qualities in it as it went on. Arthur's was the silence of someone who had been expecting something like this and was now deciding how he felt about the specific version of it that had arrived. Mara's was the silence of someone processing strategic implications at speed, her eyes moving between the two letters with the particular focus she brought to things that required immediate multi-level analysis. "Dumbledore," Mara said. "I've been reading about him." "You've been reading about the wizarding world for 2 years, Harry said, pulling out a chair and sitting down, because this was clearly going to be a real conversation and he wasn't going to have it standing in the doorway. "Since the bloodline records," she said. "Yes. Dumbledore is complicated. He's the most powerful active wizard in Britain, possibly in Europe. He was central to the defeat of a dark wizard named Grindelwald about 50 years ago. He's been Hogwarts headmaster for decades. He's also," she paused, choosing her word, "a strategist. Of the particular kind who plans several moves ahead and treats people as pieces that can be positioned on a board." "He wants to meet me," Harry said. "To discuss certain matters of particular importance, which is a phrase that tells me nothing while implying everything." "He wants to assess you," Arthur said. His voice was level, but Harry knew that specific level well enough to know what was underneath it. "He's been looking for you since you disappeared. The wizarding world lost track of you when you left Privet Drive." "They were tracking me at Privet Drive?" "They put you there," Arthur said. "Someone placed you there when you were 15 months old. Someone made that decision and presumably someone has been keeping an eye on whether you stayed put." Harry was quiet for a moment. The owl, which had apparently decided to follow him through the transit corridors, was now on the back of a nearby chair, tidying its feathers with the focused industry of a creature reclaiming its dignity. "What do you know about my parents' deaths?" Harry said. It was a question he'd asked before, in pieces, at different times over 5 years. He'd never asked it this directly, this whole. Arthur and Mara looked at each other with the look that meant, we've been waiting for this version of the question. Tell me everything, Harry said. Not the pieces. All of it. Arthur told him. The full story, as Arthur had assembled it from Wizarding World contacts he'd developed quietly in the 4 years since bringing Harry to Atlantis, the dark wizard who called himself Voldemort, the war that had terrorized the Wizarding World through Harry's early childhood, James and Lily Potter's deaths, the specific impossible fact of a killing curse that had struck an infant and somehow failed, the scar that was the evidence of that failure, and the reason Harry had been placed with the Dursleys at all, a blood protection, a very specific sacrificial magic that his mother had invoked in the moment of her death, tied to blood kin. Harry sat through all of it without interrupting. He sat with the stillness that wasn't the old defensive stillness anymore. This was the stillness he'd developed in training, the one that meant he was taking in information and doing nothing with it until he had all of it. When Arthur finished, Harry said, "The killing curse failed because my mother died choosing to protect me." "That's the theory," Arthur said. "It's more than a theory," Harry said. "It's consistent with what Mara found in the bloodline records about the Atlantean compact magic, the sacrificial protection forms. The ancient texts describe them. They're old magic, older than most of what the Wizarding World currently practices. If my mother had Atlantean blood and was the witch the records describe," he stopped. "She wasn't just a powerful witch who happened to die for her child. She knew what she was doing. She used it deliberately." The study was very quiet. "Yes," Mara said softly. "That's what I think too." Harry looked at the Hogwarts letter on the table. "And Voldemort's not gone. He was destroyed but not dead. The current understanding in the Wizarding World is that he's gone," Arthur said. "The assumption is that the curse rebounding destroyed him completely. But the records suggest, and I've been careful about this, something at that level of dark magic doesn't just cease to exist," Harry said. "It transforms. It persists." He was quiet again. "That's what the scar is. It's not just a mark. It's a connection." Arthur and Mara were both watching him. "I've felt it," Harry said. "Not often. Not clearly. But sometimes. A pressure. Like something at distance that occasionally remembers you exist." He touched the scar, not with any drama, just the gesture of someone identifying a specific feature on a map. "I didn't know what it was. Now I do." He looked up. "We should figure out what to do about it. But that's a separate problem. Right now," he looked at the letter again, "I want to go to Hogwarts." "Because of your mother," Arthur said. "Because of my mother," Harry agreed. "She was a witch. She was extraordinary in ways I'm only starting to understand, and the world she came from is part of what I am. I've been learning Atlantis for 5 years. I want to know the other half." He looked at Arthur. "And because whatever's coming, whatever Voldemort's persistence turns into eventually, it's going to happen in that world. And I'd rather understand it from the inside than arrive late." Arthur looked at him for a long moment. The look had layers, the king, assessing, and underneath that the man who'd sat on a doorstep in the rain next to a 6-year-old with a broken pair of glasses and made a decision that had turned out to be the most correct thing he'd done in a decade. "I'm not going to tell you no," Arthur said. "I know," Harry said. "But I'm also not sending you to an unfamiliar world alone and trusting that world's institutions to keep you safe," Arthur said. "Not unchecked. Not without Atlantis behind you, visibly, in a way that makes clear what you have at your back." "I wasn't planning to hide it," Harry said. "Good," Arthur said. "Because you're going as the king's ward. That's your title in this world and you're keeping it. Anyone who deals with you in the Wizarding World deals with that reality." He paused. "I'll be contacting Dumbledore myself before you go anywhere." "And the Ministry?" "The Ministry," Mara said, with the specific tone she used for institutions she'd researched and found structurally concerning. "The Ministry of Magic," Arthur said. "The Wizarding Government. They'll need to be notified and they'll definitely have opinions. He looked at Mara. Probably a lot of opinions. Let them have opinions, Harry said. I'm going either way. He looked at the owl, which had finished its dignity restoration and was looking at him with an air of professional expectation. Do you want to stay? Harry asked it. The owl settled its feathers and appeared to be seriously considering this. You can, Harry said. There's fresh water and we can sort out food. You'd have to get used to the commute. The owl appeared to find this acceptable. Harry named it Tide, which Mara said was either charming or on the nose, and Arthur said those weren't mutually exclusive. Diagon Alley was a Tuesday in August, 3 weeks before term started, and Arthur went with Harry because he had decided to go with Harry, and Mara went with Arthur because she had decided she was not staying in Atlantis while both of them went to a major wizarding commercial district without her, which was a reasonable position and none of them argued with it. They surfaced in the Thames, used the surface transit protocols to emerge on the embankment, and walked into London like three people who were normal and inconspicuous, an assessment that required ignoring the fact that Arthur was 6'4" and looked like a Norse god in a leather jacket and Mara walked with the specific contained authority of someone who could stop a tidal wave barehanded. Harry walked between them in Atlantean formal, not court formal, nothing theatrical, just the clean line wear of the royal household's everyday designation, dark charcoal with deep blue accent work along the collar, fitted properly to an 11-year-old who had been training seriously for 4 years and was consequently not the small, slight kid the Atlantean court had seen standing in the petitions chamber a year ago. He'd grown. He was still lean but there was nothing uncertain in the way he moved. He was also wearing the glasses. Different ones, he'd had his eyes corrected with Atlantean optometric work, which meant he no longer technically needed them, but he'd kept the frames because Mara had pointed out that the lightning scar plus no glasses would be immediately recognizable to every witch and wizard in Britain, and there was a strategic value to choosing your own moment of recognition. The new frames were round, same general shape as the originals, but actually fitted correctly and not cracked. The entry to Diagon Alley through the leaky cauldron was an experience Harry filed carefully, the surface world normality of the pub exterior, the dim interior, the shift in the quality of the people inside, the witches and wizards who gave Arthur one look and then a second look, who glanced at Harry and then stiffened with the specific recognition of people who knew a famous scar when they saw one. Word spread the way word spreads in a small community about something significant, invisibly, instantly, and completely. By the time they were through the brick wall entrance and into Diagon Alley itself, there was already a current of awareness running through the street, heads turning, conversations pausing. Harry noticed. He noticed everything, always. He walked into Diagon Alley and he looked down the cobblestone street at the crooked, colorful, impossible shops, the robes and the cauldrons and the owl emporium and the wand shop at the end, the whole cheerful specific chaos of a commercial street built by and for people who had magic in their blood, and he felt something move in him. Not nostalgia. He'd never been here before. Something more fundamental, the recognition of a thing you belong to but have never touched, the wizarding world pressing its hand against the glass from one side and finding the corresponding hand on the other. Busy, Arthur said, eyeing the crowd. It's always like this in August, said a voice beside them, before term. They turned. A woman had approached, brown hair, anxious expression, carrying a list and a Diagon Alley bag and a 10-year-old girl and an 11-year-old girl who was clearly the one they were here for, given the list and the expression. The 11-year-old had brown bushy hair and very alert eyes that had gone directly to Harry and were now doing the rapid assessment thing of a highly intelligent person encountering new information. Hermione Granger, the bushy-haired girl said, to Harry, directly, bypassing the usual social warm-up. First year. Yes, Harry said. Harry Potter, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Harry said again. I've read about you, she said. Several books. The accounts are inconsistent about some details, particularly the mechanism of the curse failure. I have a theory about the sacrificial magic involved but the texts don't go far enough back to confirm it. The texts don't go far enough back because they're missing the Atlantean source material, Harry said. The mechanism is in the Second Dynasty compact records, specifically the Sacrifice and Succession volumes. Hermione Granger stared at him. The Atlantean compact records aren't available to wizarding scholars. They are if you live in Atlantis, Harry said. A beat. You live in Atlantis, she said. For 5 years, Harry said. Her eyes moved to Arthur, and to Mara, with the rapid recalibration of someone adjusting a mental model. Is that, Arthur Curry? Arthur said, extending his hand. King of Atlantis. This is Mara. Hermione Granger shook his hand with the automatic politeness of someone whose manners were operating independently of the rest of her brain, which was clearly spinning at considerable speed. The wizarding world doesn't have a formal diplomatic relationship with Atlantis, she said. That's going to change, Arthur said pleasantly. Hermione turned back to Harry. I've been reading everything I could find, she said. Before school. To prepare. I've read Hogwarts, a history 4 times and the standard book of spells for all 7 years and, what's your theory? Harry said. About the sacrificial magic. She blinked. You want to hear it? You said the published accounts are inconsistent. What do they get wrong? Something lit up in her face, the specific light of someone who has been waiting for someone to actually ask. She started talking. Harry listened, asked 2 questions, made 1 correction about the Atlantean source material that made her stop and look at him with an expression that was equal parts startled and determined, and then said, I'll send you the relevant section from the compact records. You'll need to learn Old Atlantean to read it properly, but I can provide a translation. I can learn Old Atlantean, she said immediately. I know, Harry said. You clearly learn things very fast. Hermione Granger looked at him for one more moment with an expression that was making a decision, and then she said, I think we're going to be friends. I think you're probably right, Harry said. They separated to do their respective shopping, with an agreement to find each other again at the wand shop, and Harry moved through Diagon Alley with Arthur and Mara and the specific experience of being recognized. It happened in waves. Some people just stared. Some people nudged each other. A few tried to approach, stopped by the presence of Arthur, which created a considerable clearance radius, not because he was doing anything threatening but because 6'4" with the bearing of a man who has faced sea monsters and one reads clearly at a distance. At Madame Malkin's, a blonde boy was already being fitted for robes when they entered, and he looked at Harry the way wealthy children who've been taught their own importance look at anyone new, assessing, already beginning to categorize. Hogwarts first year? The boy said. Yes, Harry said. Draco Malfoy, the boy said. The name was offered with the weight of someone who expected it to mean something. Harry Potter, Harry said. I know, Draco said, and there was something odd in his voice, practiced casualness covering a genuine something. Everyone knows who you are. He looked at Arthur and Mara in the doorway, and the casual confidence flickered for just a moment. Are those, my guardians? Harry said. Arthur and Mara Curry. Draco stared. The King of Atlantis is your guardian. Yes. A silence, during which Draco Malfoy's mental categories were doing something complex that his face wasn't quite managing to conceal. He'd clearly come in with a prepared version of this interaction, built around a particular understanding of who Harry Potter was likely to be, and that version was not surviving contact with reality. Malfoy, Harry said, because the name was in the historical records he'd read. Old wizarding family. One of the oldest, Draco said, recovering something of his footing. Your family supported Voldemort, Harry said. Not accusingly. Factually, the way he named unpleasant things. During the war. Draco went stiff. My father, I'm not making a judgment, Harry said. I'm noting it because it's in the record, and I think it's better to be direct about things than to pretend they're not there. It makes conversation more efficient. He held Draco's gaze. I don't have a problem with your family history. People make choices under pressure that they might not make otherwise. What matters is what you do with what comes after. Draco was staring at him with an expression that had given up on its original project and was now simply trying to figure out what kind of person it was looking at. "You're not what I expected," Draco said. "I never am," Harry said, with complete equanimity, and stepped up onto the fitting platform. Ollivander's was the last stop, and the wand shop was exactly as Hermione's description, which she'd provided in detail during their reconnection outside the apothecary, had suggested: narrow, dusty, with the specific quality of a place that takes itself very seriously, and which had, Harry felt, a faint but distinct hum to it, the kind of hum that comes from a concentration of old and powerful things in a small space. Mr. Ollivander himself was a small, pale man with large silver eyes that had the quality of something very old looking out of them, and he looked at Harry with an attention that had nothing performative about it, immediate, penetrating, the look of someone for whom seeing was the primary function. "Mr. Potter," he said. "I wondered when you'd come." His eyes went to the scar, then to Harry's hands, then, with a pause that Harry noted, to Arthur and Mara at the door. "And you bring formidable company." "I go everywhere with formidable company," Harry said. "Quite right," Ollivander said, with a smile that suggested he found this genuinely correct rather than merely charming. "Your hand, please." The fitting took longer than usual. Harry tried 11 wands, each one generating a reaction that Ollivander noted without expression, ranging from mild to a candlestick spontaneously igniting, which Harry apologized for. The 12th wand Ollivander brought out was from a box he retrieved from a very high shelf, and he carried it with the care of something that had been waiting. "Curious," Ollivander said, holding it out. "Very curious." "What is it?" Harry said. "Holly and phoenix feather, 11 inches, supple," Ollivander said. "The phoenix who provided the feather gave one other, only one other, in all my years. The wand that gave you that scar, Mr. Potter, is that wand's brother." Harry took the wand. The air in the shop moved. Not dramatically, not the candlestick drama of the earlier attempts, but with the specific purposeful motion of something that has found its counterpart, a warmth that ran up Harry's arm and settled, and the faint gold-green luminescence that lived in his skin lit briefly along his fingers before settling. And then, because Harry was Harry, he said, "Interesting. Brother wands, there's a resonance principle in the Atlantean compact records about magically twinned objects. They're drawn to the same conflict resolution point." He looked at Ollivander. "You knew about the connection when you brought it out." "I suspected," Ollivander said quietly. "So Voldemort and I are going to face each other," Harry said. "Eventually. The wands make that, not inevitable, but structurally coherent." Ollivander looked at him with those large silver eyes. "Most people find that information distressing," he said. "Most people weren't raised by the King of Atlantis," Harry said. "I've faced things in the deep ocean that were old when Voldemort was born. I'll manage." He paid for the wand. 7 galleons, which Arthur had provided from a vault setup that Gringotts had facilitated, with notably more deference than usual, which Harry suspected had something to do with the letter Arthur had sent the bank in advance. Hermione found them outside, breathless, with a new wand, vine wood and dragon heartstring, a stack of books that had clearly exceeded her list requirements, and the expression of someone who had just had a very good day. "Ready?" she said, to Harry specifically. "Almost," Harry said. He was looking down Diagon Alley, at the crooked buildings and the flagstone street and the people moving through it, witches and wizards going about the specific ordinary texture of their magical lives, the whole living world of it, full of history and politics and power and the particular complicated legacy that had produced him as its oddest output. "Almost," he said again, and it meant something different the second time. The meeting with Dumbledore happened 2 days before the Hogwarts Express. Arthur had requested it, chosen the location, a conference room in the Ministry of Magic that had been made available through a combination of diplomatic pressure and the general institutional uncertainty that comes from a foreign king requesting a meeting with specific parameters, and Harry had sat in on the preparation discussion, which was essentially Arthur and Mara laying out exactly what they were prepared to discuss, what they weren't, and what their non-negotiable positions were. Harry's non-negotiable position was that he was going to Hogwarts and he was going as himself, fully, no concealment, no managed revelation, no gradual introduction of what he was. Dumbledore arrived with the particular entrance of someone who had, for a very long time, been the most powerful person in every room he entered, and who was now sitting across from a combination of people that required him to revise that assessment in real time. He was tall, white-bearded, wearing robes that managed to be simultaneously flamboyant and authoritative, with half-moon spectacles and eyes that were the famous blue, the blue that everyone in every account described as piercing or twinkling depending on his mood. Right now they were assessing. He looked at Arthur. Then Mara. Then Harry. "Mr. Potter," he said, and his voice was warm, and the warmth was real and also, Harry noted, very precisely calibrated. "I cannot tell you what a relief it is to see you safe and well." "Thank you for the letter," Harry said. It was well timed. The owl had some difficulty with the commute. Dumbledore smiled. "I confess I wasn't entirely certain the owl would find you. The enchantment on the acceptance letters has never been tested at quite that depth." "It managed," Harry said. "Indeed." Dumbledore's eyes were doing their assessing thing, the bright attentive movement of someone reading multiple levels of a situation simultaneously. Harry let him look, met his gaze without filling the silence with anything, and waited. Dumbledore shifted his assessment to Arthur. "King Curry. I understand you've been Harry's guardian for 5 years." "I have," Arthur said. "A remarkable circumstance," Dumbledore said, "that you should encounter him when you did." "Not particularly remarkable," Arthur said. "I was in the area. He needed someone. And the Atlantean connection to his bloodline." Dumbledore's voice was careful. "You've made him aware." "We've made him fully aware of his entire heritage," Mara said. "Both of them. We thought complete information was preferable to managed revelation." Something moved in Dumbledore's expression, so brief and so well controlled that if Harry hadn't been watching specifically for the points where real and performed diverged, he'd have missed it. A recalibration. The recognition of someone who had planned for a particular kind of Harry Potter and had just been introduced to a different one. "I'm glad he's been well cared for," Dumbledore said, and this part was simply true. "There are things we need to discuss," Arthur said. "About Harry's safety at Hogwarts, and about certain threats that remain relevant." "The one called Voldemort is gone," Dumbledore said, with firmness. "Is not gone," Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him. "The connection through my scar," Harry said. "The residual presence. It's consistent with soul-fragmenting dark magic. There's academic work on it in the deeper Atlantean texts that predates the equivalent wizarding scholarship by about 400 years. Voldemort did something to ensure his persistence. The curse rebounding didn't destroy him. It dispersed him." He paused. "I think you know this already." The room was very quiet. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a long moment, and in those eyes, beneath the warmth and the assessment and the long careful practice of being Dumbledore, something genuine moved, surprise, and respect, and underneath those something more complicated. "You are not what I expected," Dumbledore said, slowly. "I know," Harry said. "What did you expect?" A pause. "Someone who needed guidance," Dumbledore said. "I welcome guidance," Harry said. "From people who are honest with me about what they know and what they're planning. I'm going to Hogwarts to learn, and because my mother came from that world and I want to understand it, and because I think the threat that killed my parents is going to resurface and I want to be where I can do something about it." He looked at Dumbledore directly. "I'm not going to be managed. I'm not going to be positioned. And I'm not going to pretend to know less than I do for someone else's convenience." He kept his voice level and clear, not hostile. "That said, I think you're trying to protect people, and I think you're very good at it, and I'd rather be working with you than in parallel to you." Dumbledore was quiet. "Tell me about the Philosopher's Stone," Harry said. "A beat." "It's going to be at Hogwarts this year," Harry said. "Isn't it? You've moved it there for safekeeping." And whatever's left of Voldemort, the dispersed fragment, knows it's there. The silence stretched. Yes, Dumbledore said. Quietly. Without the warmth architecture, just the word. Then I suggest, Harry said, that we figure out together how we're going to handle that. Because it's going to happen, and I'd rather it happen on terms we've chosen. Arthur, beside Harry, said nothing. But his hand, resting on the table, relaxed in the specific way it relaxed when a situation resolved to a version he was comfortable with. Harry had seen it in court hearings and in negotiations and in training sessions when Harry executed something particularly clean. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a long moment more. Then he said, very quietly, with something in his voice that was not quite managed, "Your mother would have been remarkable." "She was remarkable," Harry said. "I'm just trying to be worth the price she paid." The silence after that had a different quality. "Very well," Dumbledore said. "Let us talk about the stone." They talked for 2 hours. Harry asked the questions, Arthur reinforced the non-negotiables, Mara noted the inconsistencies in Dumbledore's account with quiet precision, and by the end they had something that was neither a plan nor an alliance but was something in the territory of both, a shared understanding, a channel of honest communication, and a specific mutual regard of people who have taken each other's measure and found it significant. Walking out of the ministry, back through the phone box exit into London, Harry breathed the grey London air and looked up at the overcast August sky. "Well?" Arthur said. "He's not going to be completely honest with me," Harry said. "He'll tell me what he thinks I need to know and hold back what he thinks I don't. That's who he is, structurally, he can't help it. He sees the board and he moves the pieces." He paused. "But he's not an enemy. He genuinely wants good outcomes. He'll be useful and occasionally frustrating." "Standard description of most powerful allies," Arthur said. "Exactly," Harry said. "I can work with it." Mara looked at him sidelong. "You told him not to manage you in the first 3 minutes. Better to establish it early," Harry said. "Less confusion later." The Hogwarts Express platform, platform 9 3/4, accessed through a brick pillar at King's Cross with the blithe confidence of someone who had swum into an underwater kingdom at age 6 and was not going to be deterred by a structural barrier, was everything the Diagon Alley crowds had suggested it would be. Noise and steam and owls and cats and the specific chaotic energy of several hundred children beginning something. Arthur had insisted on coming to see him off, which Harry had accepted with the equanimity of someone who had stopped trying to convince Arthur that security measures were sometimes excessive. Mara had come too, which meant platform 9 3/4 had, for perhaps the first time in its history, 2 Atlantean royals standing near the scarlet engine in the steam and the morning light, drawing the extended staring of every witch and wizard in the vicinity. Hermione found Harry in approximately 40 seconds, appearing through the crowd with her parents trailing behind and her trunk already loaded and her expression carrying the energy of someone who had spent 2 days running through mental preparation and was ready to begin. "I thought about what you said," she said, "about the old Atlantean grammar structure being more efficient for understanding the compact texts, and I think you're right, but I'd need to see the phonetic guides because the written form alone isn't." "I'll send them," Harry said. "First week." "Good." She looked at Arthur and Mara. "Good morning." "Good morning," Mara said, with the specific warmth she reserved for people Harry chose. Harry turned to Arthur. Arthur looked at him, this kid, this 11-year-old with the lightning scar and the deep-water eyes and the way of standing that had nothing of the Privet Drive doorstep left in it, this person who 5 years ago he'd found in the rain and made a decision about that he would make again every single time, and did the hand on the back of the neck thing. "Any instructions?" Harry said. "Don't blow up the school." "I'll try. Learn things. That's the plan. And if something goes wrong, I'll handle it," Harry said. "And then I'll tell you." "In that order?" "Probably," Harry admitted. Arthur made the not-a-laugh sound. Then he pulled Harry into a brief, complete hug that Harry returned with both arms, and pulled back and held his shoulders for a moment, and looked at him. "Your mother would have loved watching you walk onto that train," he said. Harry held that. Put it somewhere real and permanent. I know, he said. He picked up his trunk. Tide was in the owl carrier, deeply self-possessed about the whole thing. He looked once more at Arthur, and once at Mara, who was doing the thing where her face was very controlled and her eyes were doing something different. See you at Christmas, he said. Then he turned and walked into the steam, into the noise, into the wizarding world that was the other half of what he was, and the scarlet engine waited, and somewhere ahead of him the year was beginning, and he was completely and entirely ready for it. Chapter 4, The Depth of Things. The Sorting Hat took one look inside Harry's head and went quiet for almost a full minute. The great hall was doing its collective held-breath thing, for tables of students watching the first years line up, the usual whispers running like current through the room. Harry had walked in with the others, hands easy at his sides, taking in the enchanted ceiling with its simulated stars, the floating candles, the sheer overwhelming scale of it, and filed it all away in the part of his mind that catalogued new environments. When McGonagall called, "Potter, Harry," the whispers didn't just run, they broke open into something closer to a wave, heads turning, people craning from the upper years, and Harry walked to the stool and sat down and put the hat on with the same equanimity he'd brought to the Atlantean petitions chamber. The hat settled over his ears and went to work. Interesting, it said, in a voice that lived directly behind his eyes, dry and old and thoroughly unsurprised by anything. Very interesting indeed. I haven't seen a mind quite like this in, well, some time. Harry waited. Two kinds of power, both of them old. Strategic intelligence. Emotional depth you don't show much. Loyalty you die for, given to very few people. Bravery, yes, clearly, but not the kind that needs an audience. A pause. You know what you are already. That makes my job easier and considerably less interesting. What's the answer? Harry thought back. You already know the answer, the hat said. You've known since you walked in and read the room. Gryffindor, Harry thought. Because my mother was, and because the things I value most, the specific things, fit it. And because, the hat said, with something that might have been approval in its ancient voice, a Slytherin with your particular combination of traits tends to become either exceptional or catastrophic, and you're already exceptional enough that the catastrophic risk is low. But more importantly, yes. Because of your mother. Because of what she believed about choosing the hard thing. Is there more? One thing, the hat said. You have something in your scar that is going to make itself known before this year is out. You already know that too. I'd advise caution, but I suspect caution is a thing you define on your own terms. It is, Harry agreed. Gryffindor, the hat announced. The Gryffindor table erupted. Harry handed back the hat, crossed to the table, and sat down between a red-headed boy who slid along the bench to make room with a wide grin and an older student who was clapping enthusiastically. Hermione, sorted shortly after into Gryffindor herself, dropped into the seat across from him with an expression of pure satisfaction. I knew it, she said. Did you? Harry said. I'd have been surprised by anything else, she said. The red-headed boy leaned in. Ron Weasley. My brothers said everyone was expecting you to come to school years ago, then you just disappeared. Where were you? Atlantis, Harry said. Ron Weasley stared at him. The underwater one? Ron said. That's the one. Ron sat with this for a moment. Brilliant, he said, with the straightforward wonder of someone whose appreciation for extraordinary things had not yet been complicated by the need to seem unimpressed. What's it like? I'll tell you over dinner, Harry said, and the feast appeared, and that was the beginning of Ron Weasley, who turned out to be the specific kind of person Harry hadn't known he needed, funny, genuine, constitutionally incapable of pretending to feel things he didn't feel or not feel things he did, with a warmth that had nothing calculated about it. By the end of dinner Harry had told him the broad strokes of Atlantis, learned that Ron had 5 brothers and 1 sister and a ghoul in the attic and a rat named Scabbers who was asleep in his pocket, and discovered that Hermione and Ron would, if left to their own social instincts without Harry as a bridge, almost certainly have irritated each other into a sustained low-level conflict within the first week. He made a mental note to bridge actively. The castle was its own project. Harry spent the first week learning it the way he'd learned Atlantis, not the tourist version, the structural version, the understanding of a place's logic and the way its systems work together. The moving staircases had a pattern. The portraits had politics among themselves and were useful sources of historical information if you asked them specific questions about events they'd personally witnessed. The ghosts were less useful but more entertaining. The restricted section of the library was secured with a ward that was, from an Atlantean technical perspective, moderately impressive, and Harry spent 10 minutes studying its construction and then went through the proper channels and got a signed permission slip from Dumbledore, which was both simpler and more satisfying. Dumbledore had provided the permission slip without requiring detailed justification, which told Harry that their understanding from the ministry meeting was functioning as agreed, a channel of honesty, operated on trust, verified by behavior. The classes were interesting. Harry sat through them with the attention he brought to everything, which was total and active rather than passive, and the experience of being taught wizarding magic formally was something he hadn't been able to anticipate from books alone. There was a texture to it, a tradition in the teaching methods that had hundreds of years of accumulated pedagogical habit in it, some of it excellent and some of it deeply inefficient, and in the third week he had a 15-minute conversation with Professor Flitwick after charms that turned into 45 minutes and ended with Flitwick giving him 3 advanced theory texts and saying, with every evidence of genuine delight, remarkable, remarkable, the Atlantean pressure dynamic model you're describing would revolutionize how we teach Wingardium Leviosa. I can write it up, Harry said. Please do, Flitwick said. Potions was Snape, and Snape was a different problem. Not a dangerous one. Not immediately threatening. Just, a problem in the specific sense of a person whose surface behavior and underlying reality were significantly misaligned, in ways that Harry found both professionally interesting and personally uncomfortable. Snape was brilliant. Harry could see that plainly. The quality of his mind was visible in the subject he taught, in the way he moved through the material, in the precision of his corrections. He was also, for reasons that Harry had spent one evening researching in the restricted section and emerged from with a complicated picture, deeply invested in a version of Harry Potter that had nothing to do with the actual Harry Potter. The first potions lesson established the dynamic with unusual efficiency. Potter, Snape said, on the first question, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? Harry looked at him. Snape's black eyes had the quality of someone who had asked this question expecting a particular kind of wrong answer. Draught of living death, Harry said. Though the ratio in the standard text is slightly inefficient, the Atlantean variant of the preparation uses a different distillation sequence for the wormwood that produces a more stable compound with a longer shelf life. The briefest pause. The standard preparation will suffice for this class, Snape said. Of course, Harry said. I just thought it was interesting. Note for the class, Snape said, turning to the room, that fame and unusual guardianship arrangements are not substitutes for proper academic preparation. Harry said nothing. He'd met Lord Nereus of the Atlantean Eastern Court. He had a reasonable threshold for the use of authority as a substitute for argument. Hermione, beside him, was visibly outraged on his behalf. Ron, on his other side, was making a face that expressed his feelings efficiently without requiring words. After class, Ron said, "He's got it in for you." "He's got it in for a version of me that doesn't exist," Harry said. "A spoiled famous kid who coasted on his name." That's who he was expecting. "And now?" Hermione said. "Now he has to figure out what I actually am," Harry said. "That'll take a while. People don't revise first impressions quickly when they've had them a long time." "He knew your father," Hermione said carefully. "She'd done research." "I know," Harry said. "And my father gave him reasons to build those impressions. I'm not my father, but I understand why it's complicated. I'll give him time." "That's very generous," Hermione said, "given that he just implied you're academically inadequate in front of the entire class." He's wrong, Harry said. Being wrong doesn't require a dramatic response. It just requires being right, consistently, until the evidence changes the assessment. Ron stared at him. Do you practice being like this? I trained with Atlantean warrior scholars for 4 years, Harry said. There's a lot of emphasis on not wasting energy on things that don't matter. It matters, Ron said, with feeling. It matters less than the potion's grade at the end of year, Harry said. Which will be the actual evidence? The incident with Draco Malfoy happened on a Thursday. Harry had known it was coming. He'd tracked the social dynamics of the school in the first week with the same instinct that had tracked Atlantean court politics, and Draco, who had been sorted into Slytherin and who was, Harry had concluded, working very hard at performing the version of himself that his family and house expected, had been building towards something. Not out of genuine malice, Harry thought, which was the more interesting read, out of the social requirement of his position, which demanded that the rivalry with Harry Potter be established and visible. It happened in the corridor near the library, and it involved a flying broomstick that Neville Longbottom had dropped, and Draco picking it up and holding it over Neville's head while Crabbe and Goyle flanked him, with the specific cruelty of boys who've worked out that power operates through spectacle. Harry stopped walking. Neville was trying very hard not to show how upset he was, which was its own form of dignity that Harry recognized, and Draco was doing the thing, the holding high, the waiting for someone to jump or beg. Malfoy, Harry said. Draco looked at him. The performing cruelty expression was still up, but underneath it something shifted. Give it back, Harry said. Simply. Not a threat. Not a confrontation. Just a statement of what was going to happen. Come and get it, Draco said, which was what the performance required him to say. Harry looked at him for a moment with the clear-eyed patience that Calder had spent years forging in him, the patience that came from training in environments that required you to see past the surface of a situation to its actual mechanics. I've read about your family, Harry said. They've held their position for 600 years by being intelligent and adaptive. By reading power correctly and aligning with it. He kept his voice level, conversational. I'm not going to fight you in a corridor over Neville's broomstick. But I want you to think about what you're actually choosing right now, and whether it's what you'd choose if you were thinking strategically rather than playing to an audience. Draco stared at him. Crabbe and Goyle will back whatever you do, Harry said. They always will. That's not a test of your judgment, it's the absence of one. Neville has nothing you need. This, he looked at the broomstick, doesn't give you anything useful. He met Draco's eyes. What does it actually get you? The silence stretched. Draco lowered the broomstick and held it out to Neville. His face was complicated, the performance disrupted, what was underneath it younger and less certain and considerably more interesting. Neville took his broomstick and moved away, and Crabbe and Goyle looked at Draco with the look of people waiting to be told what had just happened, and Draco looked at Harry with something that wasn't hostility. You're strange, Draco said. Frequently, Harry agreed. But I mean what I said. Your families survive by reading situations correctly. You should practice that. He walked away. He heard Ron, behind him, exhale sharply. You just talked him down, Ron said, when they were clear. Draco Malfoy. You talked him down. He wasn't sure what he wanted, Harry said. Most people aren't. Give them a reason to choose the better option and sometimes they take it. And when they don't? Hermione said. Harry considered. Then you deal with it differently. But you give the better option first. November brought 2 things, Quidditch and the Troll. Harry had made the Gryffindor Quidditch team in the 3rd week, had flown for the first time and discovered that it was the closest surface world equivalent to moving through water that he'd yet found, the 3-dimensional freedom of it, the way you read the air the same way you read current, and McGonagall, who'd watched his first practice session with an expression she'd clearly been trying to keep off her face and failing, had put him as seeker against every existing protocol about first year eligibility. The first match was Gryffindor versus Slytherin, and it was excellent, and Harry caught the snitch in 4 minutes and 23 seconds, which the commentary box described as unprecedented, and which Harry thought was slightly inefficient because he'd seen it 20 seconds earlier but had needed to confirm the trajectory first. The troll happened at Halloween, which was a coincidence of timing that Harry thought about later with the specific attention he gave to things that might not be coincidences. Hermione was in the girls' bathroom crying because Ron had said something stupid about her showing off, which Ron had already accepted was a mistake of significant proportions and was actively torturing himself about in the way Ron did self-reproach, thorough, genuine, and completely without self-protective minimization. Harry was in the process of pointing out to Ron that the solution was a direct apology rather than extended anguished guilt when the troll entered the corridor and the situation escalated past the interpersonal. The troll was 12 feet of enthusiastic destruction and it turned toward the girls' bathroom with the navigational instinct of something that moved toward noise. Harry was already moving. He didn't announce it. He didn't wait for a plan. He assessed the troll, size, speed, center of gravity, the way it was holding the club, the structural weaknesses of the space, in approximately 2 seconds and then moved, crossing the space in a way that was fast enough to make Ron make a sound of alarm behind him. "Harry," Ron started. "Get a professor," Harry said, and that was the last instruction before the problem became something to solve rather than something to discuss. Hermione was backed against the wall near the sinks when Harry came through the bathroom door, and she looked at him with the expression of someone who was frightened and also furiously running calculations. The troll was between them, swinging the club in the loose exploratory way of something that hadn't yet committed to a specific target. Harry looked at the troll. The troll looked at Harry. "Hey," Harry said. The troll swung the club at him. Harry moved under it. The movement was Atlantean combat form, the low-line evasion that Calder had drilled into him until it lived in his body rather than his mind, and came up on the troll's left side and said, clearly and in the old command voice that the deep-sea creatures responded to, a word in Old Atlantean that meant something between stop and yield and this is not worth it for you. The troll stopped. It looked at him with the small-eyed confusion of something that had just received a signal it didn't have context for but which its primitive nervous system recognized as important. The club lowered. Hermione, against the wall, had her wand out. "I could have used a knockback jinx," she said. "I know," Harry said. "But it seemed more efficient to ask." "You spoke to it." Old Atlantean command resonance. It works on anything with sufficient nervous system development. He looked at the troll, which was now standing with the club by its side, looking vaguely bewildered. "We should probably contain it until a professor arrives rather than letting it wander." "How do we contain a 12-foot troll? Do you know locomotor mortis?" "That's third year, you read the third-year textbook in August," Harry said. She did, in fact, know locomotor mortis. She cast it with first-attempt precision that was either excellent tutoring or raw gift or most likely both, and the troll's legs locked, and it sat down heavily and looked around with the expression of someone who'd had a very confusing evening. Quirrell arrived with McGonagall and several other professors 3 minutes later, and the scene they found was a bound troll sitting peacefully in the girls' bathroom, a first-year witch with her wand still out and her hair wild and her expression fierce with the specific energy of someone who has just solved a non-trivial problem, and a first-year wizard standing next to the troll with the relaxed attention of someone whose training had prepared him for significantly worse. McGonagall did the face. Harry had already catalogued McGonagall's faces. This was the face she used when something had happened that she needed to respond to officially but whose technical outcome was deeply satisfying. "How," she said, "did you lock its legs?" "I didn't," Harry said. "Hermione did." McGonagall looked at Hermione. "Third-year binding charm," Hermione said. "The troll's musculature responds well to it because of the density of the nerve clusters in the 5 points to Gryffindor," McGonagall said. Then, to Harry, "And you spoke to it?" "Command resonance," Harry said. "Atlantean technique. I can write it up if it would be useful for the school's magical creature knowledge base." McGonagall looked at him for a moment in the particular way she had of looking at him, the look that had a lot of McGonagall's own history in it, the long practice of a woman who had taught James Potter and who had known Lily Evans and who was, Harry suspected, in a constant state of recalibrating around the son who was neither of them and both of them and something else entirely. "That would be useful," she said. "Yes." Quirrell was in the corner, pale and shaking, his hands clasped and his eyes moving around the room with the specific quality of someone running an internal calculation. Harry watched him the way he watched everything, openly, without appearing to, and noticed the thing that didn't fit. Most people, arriving at a contained troll in a bathroom, experienced relief. Quirrell was experiencing something else. Later, in the common room, with Ron back from getting professors and looking like someone who'd resolved his guilt through the conversion of action, the three of them sat close together by the fire and Harry was quiet for a few minutes in the processing way. "What?" Hermione said. "Quirrell," Harry said. "What about him?" Ron said. "He was frightened when he came in," Harry said. "Not the way everyone else was frightened, not relieved frightened. He was, calculating." Hermione was quiet. "He announced the troll," Harry said. "In the Great Hall. That's standard. But the announcement was enough to cause exactly the kind of disruption that would send people into corridors alone." He paused. "The third-floor corridor. The one that's forbidden." "You think," Hermione started. "I think someone tried to use the troll as a distraction," Harry said. "I think the stone is better protected than they expected, and I think Quirrell knows that. And I think whatever's sharing Quirrell's body knows it too." Ron stared. "Whatever's sharing, the turban," Harry said. "The smell. The way he moves sometimes. It's not just a nervous man. There's something, a presence. Attached to him. Living in him." He touched the scar briefly. "I'd recognize that kind of dark persistence anywhere." The fire crackled. Outside the windows, November was doing its thorough work on the Scottish castle's surrounding grounds. "Voldemort," Hermione said quietly. "A piece of him," Harry said. "Dispersed, not dead. I told Dumbledore. I think Dumbledore knows but is managing the situation in his way." He paused. "The stone can't be allowed to be used. Voldemort with a body and full power is a different problem than Voldemort as a fragment. So what do we do?" Ron said. Harry looked at him. Ron Weasley, with his freckles and his genuine eyes and his absolutely uncomplicated willingness to walk into a girl's bathroom where a troll was because his friend was there, Ron, who had about him the quality of a true thing in a world full of performed ones. "We learn," Harry said. "Everything we can, about what's protecting the stone and how the defenses are structured. We don't rush. We let the year teach us what we need to know. And when the moment comes," he looked at the fire. "We're ready." December came and went, Christmas with it. Harry took the express back to London, and Arthur met him at King's Cross with an expression that was trying to be casual about how good it was to see him and was not quite managing it, and they went down to Atlantis for 3 weeks. Atlantis at Christmas was a particular thing, the deep ocean festivals of the solstice season, which Atlantis marked in ways that had nothing to do with surface traditions but carried the same human heart of them, light and warmth and gathering and the specific joy of being in a place that held you. Harry sat in the water gardens and read and swam and sparred with Calder and had long evenings with Arthur and Mara that wound through everything, Hogwarts and classes and Snape and Ron and Hermione and Dumbledore and Quirrell and the stone. Arthur listened to the Quirrell assessment with the focused attention of someone who knew what Voldemort was and took the threat seriously, and said, "Tell me the moment you think it's moving toward action." "I will," Harry said. "Not after," Arthur said. "I know," Harry said. "Harry." "I'll tell you," Harry said. "I promise." Arthur held his gaze for a moment, and it was the look that had nothing of the king in it, just the man who'd found a child in the rain and built a life around the decision he'd made in that moment. "I know you can handle it," he said. "That's not the point. The point is I shouldn't handle it alone when I don't have to," Harry said. Yes, Arthur said. I understand that, Harry said. And he did. He'd been learning it for 5 years, the specific lesson of being a person who had people, and what that meant, and how different it was from the private drive version of existing where you were essentially furniture with the added inconvenience of needing food occasionally. He went back to Hogwarts in January with 3 new books from the Atlantean archive on soul fragment dark magic, a set of notes from Mara on the specific magical mechanics of Voldemort's dispersion theory, and a letter for Dumbledore that Arthur had written and which was, knowing Arthur, simultaneously diplomatic and completely direct. February brought the thing with the mirror. Harry found it on a Thursday night while following a thread in the restricted section that led from the soul fragment texts to a reference about reflective magic objects used as desire traps or power anchors. He went down the 3rd-floor corridor, past the locked door, which he opened with a second-year unlocking charm without much difficulty, past the 3-headed dog, which was asleep, which told him that someone had been through recently enough to play music and had left, through the following chambers, which were, as he'd suspected, a series of protections designed by different professors. He moved through them methodically. The devil's snare was clearly Sprout's, straightforward once you knew the light principle. The flying keys chamber was flying keys in a room full of broomsticks, which was either charming or slightly too on the nose as a challenge for a school full of Quidditch players. The chess set was McGonagall's, and it was the best of them, a genuine strategic puzzle that required you to play with real consequence, which Harry did, efficiently, with the specific chess mind he'd developed playing against Mara, who was ruthless. The troll in the next room was already unconscious, which confirmed someone had been through ahead of him. The final chamber had the mirror. Harry stood in front of it and looked at what it showed him, and what it showed him was not a single image but something layered, his mother, red-haired and green-eyed and smiling, and beside her his father, and they were standing in front of something that took him longer to identify because it wasn't a place he'd ever seen but which he recognized from the records, the house in Godric's Hollow, intact, before. And then the image shifted, the same faces, but older, in Atlantis, in the East Wing, and Arthur and Mara were there, and the water gardens were visible through the windows, and it was a complete and specific thing, a family in a place, whole. He stood with it for a moment. Just a moment. Then he looked at the stone's hiding place, visible in the mirror through the mechanism that Dumbledore had built into it, the stone appearing in the reflection of someone who wanted to find it but not use it, and noted its location, and stepped back. Quirrell was in the chamber. He had come in behind Harry, quietly, with the specific quiet of someone practiced at not being heard, and he was standing at the chamber entrance with his eyes already on the mirror. "I wondered whether I'd find you here," Quirrell said. His voice was different, steadier, the nervous effect gone. "The boy from Atlantis. The famous Harry Potter." He tilted his head. "You know what I'm looking for." "The stone," Harry said. "Yes." "Then you'll help me find it," Quirrell said, and his wand was out, and his voice had a quality underneath it now, a depth that wasn't Quirrell at all. Harry looked at him. "No," he said. Clearly and simply, the way he said things he meant completely. "You're 11 years old," Quirrell said. "And I'm prepared to, you're not going to curse me," Harry said. "You tried that already, the Quidditch match. Whatever's working through you has been keeping its distance from me since September, which means it knows about the scar connection, which means it knows what physical contact costs it. You can't risk a direct confrontation." Quirrell went still. "And you need the mirror," Harry said. "Which means you need me out of the way non-destructively. Which limits your options significantly." He kept his voice level, factual. "Also, Professor Dumbledore is going to be here in," he glanced at the space over Quirrell's shoulder, the specific glance of someone calculating, "I'd estimate 6 minutes. The protections on this corridor are monitored. Someone came through ahead of me and the alert system activated. Dumbledore gave me access to the monitoring charm documentation in November. 6 minutes." The voice from under Quirrell's turban was not Quirrell's. It was something else entirely, thin and high and cold in the specific way of things that had been stripped of too many human characteristics to retain warmth. "He is here," it said. And Harry felt it, felt the scar light up with the connection he'd known was there since September, the resonance of the fragment in Quirrell and the fragment in himself recognizing each other across the small stone chamber, the old dark intelligence pressing against the scar like a cold hand. "Hello," Harry said, to Voldemort rather than to Quirrell. "I've been reading about you. And I," the voice said, "have been aware of you since the moment you arrived at this school. The boy who should not have survived. The boy who carries my mark." "Not yours," Harry said. "Your attempt. There's a difference." "Let me see your face," the voice said. "Come closer." "No," Harry said. A pause. "You are remarkably unafraid." "I've been in the deep ocean at 3 kilometers, Harry said. "I've sat with things that were old when your bloodline was new. I know what you are, a very powerful dark wizard who found a way to avoid death by fragmenting his soul, and who is currently attached to the back of a teacher's head because it's the best vessel he could find. That's not nothing. But it's also not something I need to be afraid of." The chamber was very cold. "You have something I want," Voldemort said. "You want the stone to restore your body," Harry said. "I understand that. What you're not understanding is that if you get it, I'll have to deal with you while you're at full power instead of dealing with the fragment problem now, which is significantly less convenient for everyone." "You think you could deal with me," Voldemort said, and the cold voice had something in it that was not quite contempt, something that was evaluating, genuinely, the person it was speaking to. "Not right now," Harry said honestly. "I'm 11 and you're one of the most powerful dark wizards in history. Currently in an inconvenient form, but powerful. So no, not today. But I'm not going to let you have the stone, either." He looked at Quirrell. "Professor Quirrell doesn't want to be here either, if that matters. Whatever's left of him doesn't." Quirrell's face did something. "I can sense it," Harry said, more quietly now. "In the same way I can sense the fragment connection. He's still there. He's been trying to resist since October." "Enough," Voldemort said, and the voice sharpened, and the cold in the room spiked, and Quirrell's wand came up. Harry moved. Not toward Quirrell. Sideways, toward the mirror, and he hit the mirror frame with both hands and said in Old Atlantean the command word for reveal, which was not a wizarding spell and which had no business working on a magical mirror built by Albus Dumbledore, except that the mirror was built to respond to intent, and what Harry's intent was, pure and specific and not desire for himself but protection of something from someone who would destroy, resonated with the mirror's own purpose. The mirror showed him the stone. And Harry did the thing he'd been thinking about since November, since he'd read Dumbledore's monitoring charm documentation and worked through the mirror's design. He reached through the reflection. It was not a wizarding technique. It was not an Atlantean technique. It was something that lived in the exact intersection of both, the hybrid magic that Mara had called woven, the place where two kinds of old power met in his blood and became a third thing. He reached through the mirror's reflective surface, which was, metaphysically, a thin place, a border between present reality and projected desire, and he felt the stone, solid and small and blazing with a heat that was not physical, and he pulled it into the real chamber. It sat in his hand. The philosopher's stone. Small. Warm. Radiating the specific magical energy of something that had been made to do impossible things. Quirrell lunged. He grabbed Harry's wrist, both hands, and the effect was immediate. The cold spiked and then broke like a wave hitting a seawall, because Quirrell's hands on Harry's skin completed the contact that Voldemort had been avoiding for months, and the old sacrificial magic, his mother's magic, the specific gift she'd woven into his blood at the cost of her life, blazed up through Harry's skin and into Quirrell's grip, and Quirrell screamed. He let go. His hands were blistered where they'd touched Harry's skin, the same blistering that happened when corruption met consecrated water in the old Atlantean rites. Quirrell stumbled back, and his face, what was visible of his face, showed something that was not performance, not possession, just the face of a man in tremendous pain looking at something he hadn't expected, and Harry felt the scar burn, and felt Voldemort rage, and felt the fragment try to disengage from Quirrell, the cold intelligence recognizing that the situation had been lost. "Don't," Harry said, to Voldemort, quietly. He wasn't sure what he meant, exactly. "Don't run. Don't leave Quirrell to die alone. Don't do this again, use another person, consume another host, treat human beings as vehicles." Voldemort didn't answer. The cold withdrew like a tide. Quirrell collapsed. Harry caught him, both hands, burning through his palms, but he didn't let go, because under the possession and the willing betrayal and all of it there was still a person, and people deserved to not fall. He lowered Quirrell to the stone floor carefully and knelt beside him. Quirrell's eyes were open. Clearer than they'd been for months, Harry suspected, whatever had been layered over his consciousness by the possession lifting away with the fragment's retreat. "You knew," Quirrell said. His voice was his own, thin and faint. "That you were still in there?" Harry said. "Yes. I thought," Quirrell stopped. "I chose it. In the beginning. I chose to let him in." "I know," Harry said. "I believed," another stop. "I wanted to be significant." "You were significant," Harry said, with the specific honesty that had no judgment in it. "You were a Hogwarts professor. That's not nothing." Quirrell looked at him with eyes that were very tired. "He'll come back." "I know," Harry said. "Stronger," Quirrell said. "I'll be stronger too," Harry said. "So will the people with me." Quirrell's eyes closed. Dumbledore arrived exactly when Harry had calculated, which was 5 minutes and 40 seconds rather than 6 minutes, slightly better than his estimate. He took in the scene, Quirrell on the floor, Harry kneeling beside him, the stone in Harry's hand, the blistered palms, the cold that lingered in the room like an after-image, and for a moment said nothing. Then he crossed the room and crouched beside Quirrell and pressed 2 fingers to the man's neck. "He's alive," Dumbledore said. "Just. He needs medical help immediately," Harry said. "The possession damage is significant. His nervous system has been under sustained strain since September, probably longer." "How do you know that?" Dumbledore said. "The Atlantean soul fragment texts," Harry said. "The possession symptoms follow the documented pattern of long-term parasitic magical attachment. His hands blistered when he touched me because of my mother's sacrificial protection, same principle as last time, except this time it broke contact rather than the curse rebounding." He held out the stone. "Here." Dumbledore looked at the stone in Harry's hand. Then at Harry's face. He had, for once, entirely dropped the performed version of himself, the warmth, the management, the careful construction, and what was left underneath was simply very old, and very tired, and genuinely moved. "You went through the defenses alone," he said. "Not alone," Harry said. "I had my training. And I knew what was coming because I paid attention all year." A pause. "Hermione and Ron don't know I came down tonight. I asked them not to." He looked at Dumbledore. "I made a judgment call. I'll own that." "You should have told me," Dumbledore said. "I tried to, in October," Harry said. "You told me the stone was well protected and not to worry." A long pause. "Yes," Dumbledore said. "I did." "You were wrong," Harry said. Not harshly. Just clearly. "Yes," Dumbledore said again. They knelt together in the cold chamber beside the fallen professor, and the stone sat between them on the floor, and Dumbledore looked at it with the eyes of a man who had made it and intended to unmake it, and Harry looked at Dumbledore with the eyes of someone who was learning, this specific and important lesson, that even extraordinary people operating in good faith could be wrong in catastrophic ways. "We need to talk," Harry said. "Properly. About what he is and what's coming. No managed information." Dumbledore met his eyes. "Yes," he said. "We do. I'm going to contact Arthur," Harry said. "Tonight. He'll want to know what happened and he'll want to be part of the conversation." "Of course," Dumbledore said, without hesitation, which told Harry something important had shifted. They got Quirrell to the hospital wing, and Dumbledore took the stone, and Harry went back to Gryffindor Tower, and when Ron and Hermione woke to find him sitting in the common room at 2 in the morning looking at his hands, the palms still faintly raw, they both came down without words and sat beside him, one on each side, and the fire burned low and warm, and the three of them sat in the specific silence of people who have found each other and know it. Harry looked at the fire. He thought about his mother, standing in the mirror, standing in Atlantis, in the East Wing, in the place she'd never been but which was a home that was real. He thought about Quirrell saying I wanted to be significant, and he thought about what significant actually meant and where it came from and how you built a life around it that didn't hollow you out. He thought about the stone being destroyed, which Dumbledore had confirmed was the plan, no more stone, which meant no more shortcut for Voldemort, which meant a harder path for the fragment, which bought time but didn't end anything. He thought about the scar. "Harry," Hermione said, gently. "Are you all right?" "Yes," Harry said. "Then, he's going to come back. Not this year, not next year probably. But he will. And when he does it'll be different from a professor in a turban." "We know," Ron said. "I want us to be ready," Harry said. "All year, every year. Not because it's inevitable but because preparation is better than reaction." "Training," Hermione said. "Training," Harry confirmed. "Real training, not just classes. I'll teach what I know from Atlantis. You know things I don't. Ron knows the wizarding world better than either of us, the actual texture of it, the people in it, the way it works." He looked at them both. "We work together, and we learn everything, and when it comes we're not surprised." Ron was quiet for a moment. "Then, you took on a piece of Voldemort in a dungeon chamber alone at midnight and your main concern is making sure we're prepared." "It worked out this time," Harry said. "Next time might not. Better to not need luck." Ron looked at him for a long moment with those genuine eyes. "Yeah," he said. "All right. We train." Hermione had already, somewhere in the last 30 seconds, taken out a notebook. Harry almost smiled. Then he did smile, the real one, the one that had been a small careful thing when Arthur found him on the step and had grown, through 5 years of people who saw him and said yes, that smile, full and unguarded, in the firelight of Gryffindor Tower with his two best friends at his sides and the year behind him and whatever came next waiting like the tide. Chapter 5, The Chamber and the Crown. The summer between first and second year was the summer Harry started building things. Not physically, though there was some of that too. Arthur had started incorporating Atlantean construction theory into Harry's education, the ancient engineering principles that had kept a city functional under 300 meters of ocean for millennia, and Harry found it absorbed naturally into the same part of his mind that loved systems and their underlying logic. But the building Harry did that summer was different. It was the summer he started understanding Voldemort the way you understand a problem you're going to have to solve, not from a distance, not academically, but from the inside of it, from the specific angle of someone who shared a scar with the problem and could feel, on certain nights, the cold shape of it at the edge of his awareness. He asked Mara to help him with the soul fragment work in July. She'd been the one to identify the theoretical framework 2 years ago, and her mind for the underlying magical mechanics was sharper than anyone else Harry had access to. They spent 3 weeks in the archive, cross-referencing the Second Dynasty compact records with the older dark magic texts that Atlantis kept in the deep vault, texts that the wizarding world either didn't know existed or had lost access to centuries ago, and built a picture of what Voldemort had done that was more complete than anything published in the wizarding academic literature. The picture was not comfortable. He didn't fragment once, Harry said, at the end of the 3rd week, sitting with Mara at the long table in the deep vault with documents spread between them and the bioluminescent lighting casting everything in its amber warmth. "No," Mara said. "Multiple times. Multiple anchors." Harry looked at the documents. Each one a piece of his soul, separated intentionally and bound to an object. Each one acting as a tether, as long as any of them exist, he can't die completely. He paused. Dispersing into Quirrell, that was emergency survival, not planned. The planned survivability is in the anchors. And we don't know how many, Mara said. The theoretical upper limit in the texts is 7, Harry said. Total divisions. After that the soul is too fragmented to sustain coherent consciousness. He looked at the scar. I might be one of them. Mara was quiet. The curse rebounded, Harry said. It didn't just fail, it rebounded with force, and something transferred in that moment. The texts describe that kind of involuntary fragmenting. Under conditions of extreme magical trauma, a fragment can be displaced into a nearby living vessel. He touched the scar. The connection I feel. The pressure, the cold at the edges. That's not just a mark. He stopped. Harry, Mara said. It's information, Harry said, decisively, filing the uncomfortable implications in the section of his mind reserved for things to deal with when he had more data. It also means I can feel when one of the other fragments is active. Weakly, but it's there. I felt something in June, a different quality from the quartal connection, colder and more deliberate. Someone found another anchor, Mara said. Or it activated, Harry said. I don't know which yet. He wrote it all up, the theory, the evidence, the scar connection, the implications, and sent it to Dumbledore with a cover note that said, in Harry's usual direct register, I believe you know some of this already. I'm sending it so we're working from the same information. Dumbledore's reply came in 2 days, longer than his usual response time, which Harry read as the headmaster sitting with the specific discomfort of being comprehensively outpaced by a 12-year-old. The reply confirmed 2 things. Dumbledore knew about the anchor fragments, called them Horcruxes in a term Harry hadn't encountered in the Atlantean texts, and was actively working on identification and destruction. It did not confirm how many existed or which ones he'd identified. Harry read the omission as Dumbledore's structural habit reasserting itself, filed it alongside the other things Dumbledore was doing in parallel that Harry wasn't fully read into, and wrote back, I'll let you know if the scar gives me anything useful. I'd appreciate the same in return. The reply to that was simply, agreed. Arthur read all of Harry's research and listened to the scar-as Horcrux theory with an expression that moved through several distinct states before settling on the particular face he made when a situation was genuinely serious and he was going to treat it as such without catastrophizing. Tell me straight, he said. What does this mean for you? If I'm a Horcrux, unintentional, but functionally similar, then destroying all the others and killing Voldemort is complicated by the fact that one of the pieces is in me, Harry said. The old texts suggest the only way to destroy a soul fragment is extreme magical destruction, something that kills the vessel. He met Arthur's eyes. Which would mean the final confrontation has a dimension that the wizarding world isn't going to enjoy thinking about. Arthur was quiet for a long time. I'm not frightened of it, Harry said. I want to be clear about that. I'm not being brave in the way that means I'm not thinking about it. I'm actually calm about it. Because the alternative is a world where Voldemort keeps coming back and keeps taking people with him, and that's worse. The math is straightforward. The math, Arthur said, with a specific kind of difficulty in his voice that Harry recognized, not argument, just the sound of a person who loved someone processing something that love made very hard. I'm 12, Harry said. We have time to find another way. I'm going to look for another way. But I want us to be honest about the landscape. Arthur looked at him for a long moment in the amber light of the deep vault, and Harry saw in his face the whole of the last 6 years, the doorstep, the crab on the beach, the hotel room, the first day in Atlantis, the water gardens, the petitions chamber, all of it, compacted into one look that was the most undefended thing Arthur's face was capable of. We'll find another way, Arthur said. We'll look for another way, Harry said. We'll find it, Arthur said, with a certainty that had nothing academic about it, the certainty of someone who intended to personally ensure the outcome through whatever combination of willpower, power, and refusal to accept the alternative was required. Harry didn't argue with it. He found, to his own slight surprise, that he didn't want to. The second year started differently than the first. Harry came back to King's Cross with Arthur and Mara, walked onto the platform, and there was already a different quality to the attention the station gave him, not just the first-year celebrity novelty but something more specific, more wary, built from a year of watching Harry Potter catch snitches in 4 minutes and talk down trolls and apparently survive whatever had happened in a third-floor corridor in June, the details of which had percolated through the student population in various stages of accuracy and embellishment. Ron was already on the platform with his family, the whole Weasley contingent, which was a considerable number of red-haired people with the specific cheerful energy of a large family that likes each other. Arthur and Molly Weasley met with the specific wariness of two people encountering an unexpected quantity of personal force in one another, which resolved in about 30 seconds into something that Harry watched with the amusement of someone observing two forces of nature negotiate a peaceful arrangement. "Your mother," Mara said to Harry, watching Molly Weasley dispatch a knitted sweater from her bag with the aggressive generosity of someone who communicates love through fiber arts, "would have loved her." "I think so too," Harry said. There was a moment, in the chaos of the platform, where Harry was standing slightly apart, watching Ron's family and Hermione's parents and the general cheerful disorder of the September 1st departure, and Mara came to stand beside him, close, and said nothing for a moment. "Your father wrote," she said. She always called Arthur that, in the specific moments where it mattered to be precise. "About?" Harry said. "Nereus filed another petition," she said. "Different angle this time, not the compact, but a challenge to the archive access. He's arguing that the research you did last summer on the Horcrux theory constituted improper use of restricted materials by an unenfranchised minor." "The research I shared with Dumbledore," Harry said. "Which Nereus somehow knows about," Mara said. Harry filed that. "Someone in Dumbledore's correspondence chain, or in the Ministry. A leak, or a deliberate feed. He'd look into it." "What's Arthur doing?" "He's handling it," Mara said. "But Harry, Nereus is persistent because he has support. There are court members who aren't ideologically aligned with him but who respond to the legal arguments, because the legal arguments are technically sound even when the motivations behind them are not. I need to spend time at court this winter," Harry said. "Not just the holidays. Real time, building relationships with the independent bloc." "Lady Varys has been asking about you," Mara said. "She would," Harry said. "She saw the direction things were going at the hearing last year. She'll want to talk." He paused. "I'll write to her this week." The train came. Harry boarded it, and the year began. The first sign was the voice. Harry heard it in the second week, a cold, floating something moving through the walls of the castle, like sound traveling through stone rather than air, hissing and flowing. He heard it during a history of magic class, Binns droning somewhere above him, and Harry sat up straight and Hermione looked at him sharply. "What?" she whispered. "Did you hear that?" Harry said. "Hear what?" He described it. She shook her head slowly. Ron, leaning across, also shook his head. Harry listened to the direction it had gone, down and to the left, toward the lower levels, and filed it with everything else he was collecting. The second sign was the spiders. Not dramatically, not hundreds of them at once. Just a slow, steady, purposeful movement of the castle's spider population, all trending in the same direction, out of the walls and down, toward the grounds. Ron, who had a specific and well-documented relationship with spiders that he managed through a combination of denial and brief heroic suffering, noticed it first and brought it to Harry with the expression of someone delivering bad news they've been sitting on. "Something's moving them," Harry said. "Something they're running from," Ron said meaningfully. "Or something that's disturbed the ground they usually occupy," Harry said. "A large presence in the lower castle or below it. Something old." He looked at Ron. "What do you know about the Chamber of Secrets?" Ron went slightly pale. You know about that?" "I've been reading since first year," Harry said. "Hogwarts, a history has a sanitized version of the founding conflict between Slytherin and the other founders. The Chamber story is there if you read it correctly. Slytherin built something, left something, and whatever he left is accessible only to his heir. He paused. I'm a Parselmouth. Ron stared at him. I can speak to serpents. I discovered it in August. Mara was doing a study on the cross-modal expression of the Atlantean water communication ability in hybrid bloodlines, and she tested me with a translated serpent speech text, and I read it as naturally as English. Harry paused. It's a rare ability. In the wizarding world it's traditionally associated with Slytherin and, subsequently, with dark magic. I think it'll become a topic when people find out. When, Hermione said. When, Harry agreed. Not hiding it. The when arrived at a dueling club in October, organized by Lockhart, the year's defense professor, who was the specific kind of fraud that Harry had identified in the first class and who Hermione had taken slightly longer to arrive at, being more charitable to published credentials than Harry was, when a Slytherin student conjured a snake and Harry spoke to it. The snake had been moving toward Justin Finch-Fletchley with the specific directed energy of something that had been aimed, and Harry had stepped forward and said, in the sibilant liquid sounds of Parseltongue, "Stop, turn, there's nothing for you here," and the snake had stopped and turned and the entire hall had gone very, very quiet. Lockhart, trying to defuse the moment, vanished the snake, which was approximately the 10th most useful thing he could have done. Harry stood in the middle of the dueling club with the complete silence of the hall pressing in from all sides and 150 students staring at him with expressions ranging from fascinated to horrified. "You spoke to it," Draco said, from his position near the dueling platform. His voice was strange, not the performing Malfoy voice, but something more honest. "That was Parseltongue." "Yes," Harry said. Draco stopped, rearranging something. "You told it to stop." "Yes," Harry said. Everyone else heard, "Something else," Hermione said, at his elbow, quickly. "We heard hissing. Like a threat." Harry looked around the hall. The expressions made more sense now. They'd heard him apparently threatening a fellow student in a dark magical language historically associated with the worst wizard in living memory. He looked at all of them directly. "I'm a Parselmouth," he said, to the room, because the room had heard what it heard and partial information was more dangerous than complete. "It's a rare magical ability that manifests in bloodlines with certain connections, mine included. I used it just now to tell the snake to stand down, which it did, which is why Justin is unbitten. I understand the historical associations the ability carries in the wizarding world. I'm not going to pretend those associations don't exist. I'm also not going to pretend the ability doesn't, because it does, and hiding things to manage other people's comfort is a practice I've generally found to produce worse outcomes than transparency." He paused. Questions. Silence. Then a Gryffindor fifth year in the back said, "Were you always?" "I confirmed it this summer," Harry said. "It may have been there earlier. Parseltongue can remain dormant until a significant threshold of magical development. The Atlantean research suggests the ability is connected to the same deep magic communication channel that lets Atlanteans speak to sea creatures, different surface expression, same underlying system. More silence, but a different quality." "The air of Slytherin thing," Ron said, from beside him, loud enough for the room, with the specific loyal directness of someone who decided the way to help was to put words to the fear and then refute it. "People are going to say it. Harry's not the heir of Slytherin. He's the ward of the King of Atlantis, he's a Gryffindor, and he just saved Justin from getting bitten. So. It didn't fix everything. The whispers started that week and built through October, Parseltongue, dark magic, Slytherin's heir, and Harry moved through them with the equanimity he'd developed in the Atlantean court, which was not indifference but the specific calm of someone who knew what they were and didn't require other people's consensus to maintain it. What concerned him more was the petrifications. Mrs. Norris first. Then Colin Creevey. Then Justin Finch-Fletchley, found in a corridor with Nick the ghost, who was petrified too, which was interesting, because a ghost shouldn't technically be petrifable, which meant whatever was doing this was operating at a magical level that could affect beings who were already not entirely alive. Harry stood over Justin's petrified form in the hospital wing and felt the voice he'd heard in the walls again, more clearly now, pulling through the direction of his scar connection, not the cold clarity of Voldemort's fragment but something older, more reptilian, the specific signature of something very large and very old living in the deep below the castle. A basilisk. He put it together from 3 sources simultaneously: the Atlantean deep creature taxonomy that catalogued large serpentine magical fauna by their magical signature, the Hogwarts, a history footnote about Slytherin's monster, and the method of petrification, indirect sight, not direct, which was the only reason the victims were petrified rather than dead, because they'd seen the basilisk's eyes through reflections. He went to Hermione. She was already in the library when he arrived, with 3 books open and the expression of someone who had arrived at a conclusion they were confirming rather than seeking. "Basilisk," she said, when she saw his face. "Basilisk," he confirmed. "You got there first." "The reflection petrification," she said. "I had it in the 2nd week after Mrs. Norris. I've been trying to confirm the age. A basilisk capable of surviving in a sealed chamber for 1,000 years would have to be ancient," Harry said. "The magical taxonomy puts the growth rate at 1 meter per century approximately. If Slytherin sealed it at founding, it's been growing for 1,000 years." He paused. "It's going to be extremely large." Hermione looked at him. "How do we find the chamber?" "We follow the plumbing," Harry said. "Myrtle's bathroom. The petrifications are distributed across the castle in a pattern. If you map them, they're all in corridors that share a water system with the 2nd-floor girls' bathroom. Something came up through the pipes." He paused. "Myrtle died in that bathroom 50 years ago. A death consistent with basilisk gaze. The chamber entrance is there." "You worked all that out," Hermione said. "We worked it out," Harry said. "You had the mechanism. I had the architectural mapping. It's the same answer." The diary arrived on Hermione's desk in November, left by unknown means, and Harry held it before she'd opened it and felt it. Not the way he'd felt Quirrell's turban, that was the cold pressing intelligence of a fragment aware of itself, communicating laterally through the scar connection. This was quieter, more patient, the specific quality of a trap rather than a presence. Designed to draw, not to confront. Built for a different prey. "Don't write in it," Harry said. Hermione looked at him. "I wasn't, I know," he said. "I'm saying it clearly anyway. This is a Horcrux." She went very still. "A fragment of Voldemort's soul," Harry said. "Preserved in an object. This is how the chamber was opened 50 years ago, this diary was used then, and it's been waiting to be used again. Someone put it here to try to open the chamber through a student." He turned it over in his hands, feeling the cold of it, the patient malevolence. "They want the basilisk to kill someone. And they want the attack to be connected to me, Parseltongue, Slytherin's heir, the Horcrux in my scar matching the one in the diary." He looked at Hermione. "Whoever gave you this wanted to frame me for the attacks." "Who would?" She stopped, reconsidering. "Someone who wants the attacks to continue. Someone who benefits from Hogwarts being destabilized. Someone with access to Voldemort's old possessions." "Malfoy," Harry said. Hermione was quiet. "Lucius Malfoy," Harry said. "Not Draco. His father." The diary: Draco had new supplies this year, brand new, ostentatiously so. Someone restocked him in Diagon Alley. Someone who put something in a second-hand cauldron to be passed along. He set the diary on the desk. "Draco doesn't know. He's not performing innocence, I've been watching him and it's real. He doesn't know his father planted this. What do we do with it?" Hermione said, looking at the diary. "Nothing with it," Harry said. "Destroying a Horcrux requires specific conditions, the Atlantean texts are clear about that. Basilisk venom is actually one of the few things capable of it, which is a terrible coincidence given what's in this school right now." He picked it up again. "We keep it safely contained. And we go into the chamber. Harry, we have to, he said. The basilisk is going to kill someone if it hasn't already. And there's something else, I've been feeling something through the scar, a quality I don't recognize. Different from the Voldemort fragment, different from the diary. He paused. Someone is in the chamber. Someone alive, I think. Someone the diary pulled in. He was right about that. It was Ginny Weasley. Ron put it together in December, white-faced, sitting in the common room after she'd stopped eating dinner with the family and started looking through the castle's eyes with the lost expression of someone who wasn't entirely in their own body. Harry had already been tracking the degradation, had been watching Ginny the way he watched Quirrell in first year, not suspiciously, but with attention, because the signature from the diary matched what he could feel sometimes at the edges of her presence when they sat near each other. She had the diary, Ron said. Earlier in the year. She had it and she was writing in it and she didn't tell me because, he stopped. She's 12. She didn't know what it was, Harry said. She must be in the chamber, Ron said. His voice was very controlled in the way voices get when the alternative is falling apart. She's been writing in it all year and now we go tonight, Harry said. Ron looked at him. Just us. Hermione's in the hospital wing, Harry said. Petrified. His voice was flat on the last word because the anger about it needed to be flat or it would interfere with the thinking. Hermione had been in the wrong corridor with a mirror, trying to confirm the basilisk's method, the precise angle of reflection petrification, and she'd been a second too slow. She was intact, physically, but she was stone still in a hospital bed and she'd been that way for 3 days and Harry was going to fix it. Hermione, Ron said. Is going to be fine, Harry said. Mandrake restorative draft is nearly ready. But we need to go tonight because another night in the chamber weakens Ginny further. He looked at Ron. You don't have to come. Ron's expression did something that was less about bravery and more about simple human decision. She's my sister, he said. All right, Harry said. Then let's go. He left a note for Dumbledore, specific, direct, the chamber location confirmed as the second-floor girls' bathroom, the Ginny situation, the diary Horcrux contained safely in his room in a sealed case, a note about Lucius Malfoy's probable involvement. He sent it with Tide and felt, somewhere in the decision, the specific weight of a promise kept, not handling it alone without telling anyone, just handling the immediate problem and telling while the handling was happening rather than after. The chamber entrance in Myrtle's bathroom opened for Harry's Parseltongue with the smooth certainty of a door that had been built for exactly this. Myrtle herself watched from her usual position with an expression that managed to be both mournful and intensely interested. I died in here, she said. I know, Harry said. I'm going to try to make sure no one else does. She looked at him with her large wet eyes. The monster came through the pipes, she said. That's how it got me. I heard the hissing, she paused, and then I saw the great yellow eyes. Where? Harry said. Exactly where were you standing? She pointed. Harry looked at the angle, the wall, the pipe configuration, and mapped it against his architectural chart of the second-floor plumbing system. The sink, he said. The sink had a tap with a serpent etching. Harry spoke to it. The entrance opened downward, a long dark shaft, and Harry looked at it, and said to Ron, the descent is fast. You ready? Ron looked into the dark and said, no, and then went in anyway, which Harry thought was the best definition of courage he'd encountered. The chamber itself was the accumulated weight of 1,000 years of Slytherin's obsession rendered in physical space, vast, stone-columned, serpent carvings everywhere, cold and damp and the specific silence of a place that has been sealed since before anyone alive was born. Water on the floor, ankle-deep, reflecting the faint luminescence of the columns. And at the far end, the great carved face of Salazar Slytherin himself, mouth open, the chamber's mechanism built into the architecture. Ginny was on the floor near the face, pale and cold to the touch when Harry reached her, her pulse thread-thin. Alive, barely, the life draining out of her as the diary drew it in. The diary was open beside her. And standing over the diary, half-formed, substantial enough to hold a wand but with the specific translucency of something that was between memory and presence, was a 16-year-old boy with dark hair and pale, sharp features and eyes that had, beneath the charming surface construction, a cold depth that Harry had felt before. Tom Riddle. Harry Potter, the memory construct said, with the warmth of a practiced performer. I've been hoping to meet you. Harry looked at him. Tom Riddle had the quality of a very precise mirror, constructed to show you what you expected, adjusted in real time to whatever seemed most likely to work. Harry had read enough about Voldemort's early years to know this was not the dark monster of the common telling but its predecessor, the brilliant, lethal, utterly isolated child who had decided that power was the only thing that mattered because it was the only thing he'd ever had. Tom Riddle, Harry said. 16 years old, Hogwarts head boy, future Voldemort. He looked at the construct thoughtfully. You're running out of time. You need Ginny's life force to become substantial enough to leave the diary, but the basilisk can't come while you're still ghost form because you can't command it. Classic trap. He looked at Riddle with a diagnostic interest that was clearly not the response Riddle had been calibrating for. How long have you been building this contingency plan? Tom Riddle's performed warmth flickered. You're not frightened, he said. I'm cautious, Harry said. There's a difference. He crouched beside Ginny and checked her pulse again, weaker, but the rate of decline had slowed, possibly because the memory construct was focusing on Harry rather than on the drawing. What do you want from me specifically? To understand you, Riddle said, and now his voice was different, stripped of performance, genuinely curious in the way of someone who had encountered the first piece of data that didn't fit their model. You should be like me. Same age when it started, an orphan, nobody, raised by people who didn't want you. Magic that other people feared. The fame you didn't ask for. He tilted his head. But you're not like me. No, Harry said. Why not? Riddle said, and the question was real, the confusion in it genuine. Harry looked at him. Tom Riddle, before he became Voldemort, before the Horcruxes, before all of it, looking at the person who should have been his closest mirror and finding something unrecognizable. You decided power was the only thing worth having because you had nothing else, Harry said. I had nothing else either, for 6 years. And then I had people. And once you have people, real people, not instruments, not assets, people who stay, it changes the calculation completely. He held Tom's gaze. You never had that. That's not your fault. But it's what made you into this. Sentiment, Riddle said. Cold again. Strategy, Harry said. People who love you will do things for you that power alone will never produce. Arthur stood in front of the Atlantean court for me. Mara spent 3 years in an archive on my behalf. Ron came down here tonight, into a 1,000-year-old chamber with a basilisk in it, for his sister. He paused. What do you have that compares to that? Tom Riddle looked at him with the cold intelligence of 50 years of dark magic looking through a 16-year-old's face, and Harry saw in that look the thing that was most dangerous about Voldemort, not the power, not the cruelty, but the genuine, absolute inability to understand what Harry was describing. The missing piece, the cavity where that understanding should have been, vast and permanent and irreparable. Enough, Riddle said, and called the basilisk. The hiss came through the chamber walls and Harry heard it the way he heard Parseltongue, directly, in its own language, the communication of something enormous and very old. Come, Riddle had said. Kill the boy. Harry stood up. He spoke back. His Parseltongue carried the Atlantean command resonance beneath it, the deep-sea authority that moved through the substrate of all old magical communication, and what he said was not don't come but something more specific, I speak for the King of the Deep. I carry both bloodlines. Attend to the older authority. The chamber went very quiet. The basilisk came through the mouth of Slytherin's statue, and it was enormous, 1,000 years of growth, 60 feet of ancient scaled power moving through the water with the displaced certainty of something that has never had a reason to be afraid of anything. It raised its head. Its eyes were closed, hunting by sound and heat, not sight, the default mode of something that knew its own killing capability. Harry looked at it. Not at its eyes. At the whole of it, the size, the age, the quality of its magical presence, the specific signature of a creature that had been here for 1,000 years in the dark, serving a purpose it hadn't chosen. I need to speak to it, Harry said, to Ron, without taking his eyes off the basilisk. Yes, all right, Ron said, in a voice that was doing everything it could. In Parseltongue, Harry said, you've been here 1,000 years. Do you know why? The basilisk was still. To serve the air, it said. Not intelligently, not the speech of the deep-sea creatures who had the full Atlantean communication complexity. Simple, old, bound. The air commands. I follow. The air used you to kill, Harry said. Yes. Children, Harry said. An 11-year-old girl is dying on the floor right now because of what the air commanded through you. The basilisk turned its great blind head. Sensing. Processing. I follow the air, it said, but the certainty was thinner. I am the air, Harry said. Not claiming Slytherin, claiming something older than Slytherin. The compact bloodline, the deep authority, the thing the orichalcum disc had recognized on a rainy street in Surrey 6 years ago. The old bloodline, the first authority. Attend to it. Something moved through the basilisk, a long shudder, visible along 60 feet of ancient muscle. Tom Riddle's voice, cold and sharp, what are you doing? Negotiating, Harry said, in English, without turning. The air commands, Riddle hissed in Parseltongue, putting authority into it, the command structure of Slytherin's blood. 2 airs, Harry said to the basilisk. One is a memory. One is standing here. Choose. The basilisk's head swung toward Riddle's translucent form. Then it turned away. I will not kill for a ghost, it said. And it moved, not toward Harry, not toward Ron, but around them, back toward the statue, back toward the dark, the ancient creature executing the only form of refusal available to a bound thing, withdrawal. Tom Riddle screamed. It was the scream of a plan falling apart, of certainty colliding with impossibility, and Harry turned to face him. The memory construct was fading, the life force that had been sustaining it was dispersing as the draw on Ginny weakened, the diary's power unraveling without the basilisk to complete the purpose. The diary, Riddle said, and lunged for it. Harry picked up the diary. He held it in both hands and looked at Riddle, at the 16-year-old ghost of the man who would become Voldemort, and said, I'm sorry for what happened to you. The child you were. The things that made you into this. He meant it. He meant it completely and without softening what came after. It doesn't change what I have to do. He had the basilisk fawn. He'd picked it up from the chamber floor without announcing it, quietly, during the negotiation, because the Atlantean texts had been specific and he'd paid attention. One broken fong from a basilisk, enough venom in the dried residue to destroy a Horcrux, if you struck the anchor object directly. He drove it through the diary. The scream that came out of the diary was not Tom Riddle's voice and not Voldemort's voice but something underneath both, the specific anguished sound of a soul fragment being destroyed, unmade, the anchor object rendering the tether to the living world impossible. It lasted 4 seconds and then stopped completely. The diary turned to ash. Ginny gasped. Harry was already beside her, one hand on her shoulder, the other pressing 2 fingers to her neck to track the pulse recovering, thin, then stronger, then steadier, the specific return of a life force that had been almost entirely drawn away coming back with the particular stubbornness of the living. Ron was there a second later, pulling his sister upright, and Ginny grabbed him with both hands and Ron made the sound of someone who had been holding themselves together through a sustained act of will and had just been given permission to stop. Okay, Ron said. Okay, Harry sat back on his heels on the cold wet chamber floor, surrounded by 1,000 years of Slytherin's obsession, one Horcrux destroyed, one giant basilisk withdrawn into the dark to wait, and felt the scar, felt the specific quality of the connection, and noticed what had changed. Quieter. One anchor less. Voldemort's tether to the living world fractionally, measurably thinner. Harry, Ginny said. Her voice was rough and frightened and ashamed in equal measure. I didn't know what the diary was. I didn't know. I know, Harry said. It was designed to be exactly what it was to you. It wasn't your fault. She stopped. You're here, Harry said. That's what matters. Ginny looked at him with red eyes and a 12-year-old's face carrying something much older in it, the specific weight of having been used, of having been the vehicle for something monstrous without consenting to it. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me, Harry said. Thank Ron. He's the one who walked into a 1,000-year-old chamber for you. Ron made a sound. He didn't seem scared, Ginny said, looking at her brother. I was absolutely scared, Ron said. I was terrified the entire time. But you came anyway, Ginny said. Obviously, Ron said, which was the most Ron thing he'd ever said. They went up, the long climb back through the shaft and out through Myrtle's bathroom, Ginny between them, and Myrtle watching their return with an expression that was almost cheerful in a Myrtle way. You survived, she said. We did, Harry said. Remarkable, she said, and floated away. Dumbledore was in the corridor. He was standing outside Myrtle's bathroom with his wand and his half-moon spectacles and the expression of someone who had received Harry's note and been moving toward this location since he read it and had arrived to find the situation already resolved. He looked at Ginny, alive, pale, upright, and then at Harry. The diary, he said. Destroyed, Harry said. Basilisk Fawn. It's ash in the chamber. He reached into his jacket and pulled out his notes, the ones he'd written in the last week, the Horcrux count estimate, the theory about the scar, the list of likely objects based on the patterns in Voldemort's known history. I've been working on a list. It's not complete and I need your information to fill the gaps. Can we talk properly this time? Dumbledore looked at the notes. Then at Harry, who was standing in the corridor having just destroyed a Horcrux at age 12, hair wet and robes damp from the chamber floor, with the relaxed certainty of someone who had done the difficult thing and was now ready to do the next one. Tonight, Dumbledore said. My office. One condition, Harry said. Name it. You tell me how many Horcruxes you've identified, Harry said. All of them. No managed information. The whole picture. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. In the lamplight of the corridor his face was very old and very honest. 6, he said. Possibly 7. One of which I believe is the scar. I believe so too, Harry said. We need to find the others before he does, and we need a method for the scar, one that isn't the obvious method. He paused. I'm working on it. I'll share everything I have. As will I, Dumbledore said, and this time it had the quality of an actual commitment rather than a managed concession. Harry nodded. He looked back at Ron and Ginny, who were sitting against the corridor wall while Ron demonstrated all available variations of "Are you okay?" at his sister, and then up at the castle ceiling, and then at Dumbledore. Malfoy, Harry said. Lucius Malfoy gave Ginny the diary. I need that addressed. Properly, not quietly. The Ministry needs to know what he had and what he used it for. The political implications, Dumbledore started, are not more important than accountability, Harry said. Flat, certain, not hostile. He weaponized a 12-year-old child with a piece of Dark Lord soul. That gets addressed. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Yes, he said. It does. The Ministry investigation that followed was, as Arthur described it when Harry told him everything that weekend via the surface communication system, a significant mess handled with varying degrees of competence. Lucius Malfoy denied everything with the smooth facility of a man who had been denying things before audiences for a long time. The diary's destruction meant there was no physical evidence, only the testimony of a 12-year-old girl and the second-hand analysis of a 13-year-old ward of the Atlantean crown. But Arthur's letter to the Ministry, specifically to the minister himself, specific, documented, naming Lucius Malfoy and citing the evidence chain and making explicit that the King of Atlantis considered the matter a question of direct harm to his ward circle, created a political pressure that diary as evidence could not. Malfoy was removed from the Hogwarts Board of Governors by the end of the month, a development that Harry heard about from the Hogwarts grapevine 3 hours before the official announcement. Draco heard about it in the Great Hall, at the Slytherin table, and Harry was watching when he did, watched the specific way Draco's face went through 3 distinct phases in 30 seconds, shock, then shame, then a controlled reassembly into something that was trying to be blank and wasn't quite. Harry caught him in the corridor that evening. Not following, not hunting, just the convergence of 2 people whose paths happened to cross. Malfoy, Harry said. Draco looked at him with eyes that had something raw in them. I know you didn't know about the diary, Harry said. Silence. You didn't know what your father was doing, Harry said. You didn't plant it, you didn't choose it, and the fact that it happened isn't your responsibility. He paused. What happens next, with what you know now about what your father is, that's yours to decide. Not mine. Why are you telling me this? Draco said. Because you're not stupid, Harry said. And because I think you've known for a while that the things your father taught you about power and worth and purity are a system with significant structural flaws, and you've been managing the discomfort of that knowledge by performing compliance, and that's not going to hold indefinitely. He held Draco's gaze. I'm not your enemy. I never was. But I'm also not going to tell you what to do with this. Draco said nothing for a long moment. He thought it would discredit you, Draco said finally. Quietly. That's what I think. He thought if Ginny Weasley was used and the connection to the diary and the chamber could be traced back to you, the Parseltongue, the heir narrative, I know, Harry said. He didn't care about Ginny, Draco said. Not a revelation, a reckoning. The specific flat statement of someone who has always known a thing and is now saying it out loud for the first time. No, Harry said. He didn't. The corridor was quiet. Granger, Draco said, after a moment. Is she, recovering, Harry said. The Mandrake restorative draft worked. She'll be out of the hospital wing by Thursday. Something moved through Draco's face that wasn't the performing version of anything. Good, he said. And walked away. Harry watched him go, and thought about Tom Riddle saying you should be like me, and thought about the difference between where you started and what you chose to build, and thought about a 12-year-old boy in a chamber deciding that power was the only thing, and another 12-year-old boy in a corridor beginning to decide that it wasn't. Small things. Important ones. Hermione was out of the hospital wing on Thursday, exactly as Harry had said, arriving at breakfast with her hair at maximum density and her expression carrying the specific focused energy of someone who had been stationary for a week and had strong feelings about it. Tell me everything, she said, sitting down. I wrote it up, Harry said, and handed her 12 pages of notes. She read them through breakfast. Ron added commentary. Harry ate and watched the Great Hall and felt the year settling around him, the end of it, not fully but approaching, the specific sense of a chapter closing. Hermione set down the notes after page 11. The scar, she said. The Horcrux possibility. She looked at him very directly. You've known since summer. Yes, Harry said. And she paused. You're very calm about it. I'm working on a solution, Harry said. So is Mara, and so is Dumbledore, now. There's an angle in the Second Dynasty protective magic texts about voluntary dissolution of involuntary magical bonds, it might be applicable. I'm not certain yet. He paused. I'm not frightened of it. I want to be honest about that rather than performing calm. I've thought about it carefully and I'm genuinely at peace with the landscape as long as we keep looking for alternatives. Hermione looked at him for a long moment with the specific intensity of someone for whom love and intelligence were completely integrated, who thought hard about the people she cared about and never pretended she wasn't thinking. We'll find it, she said. She said it the way Arthur had said it, with the same quality of absolute intention rather than hope. "I know," Harry said. And for the first time, from both of them, it didn't sound like optimism. It sounded like a fact that hadn't happened yet.